Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Star Wars. The original trilogy changed cinema, and there's so much going on in each one of the movies. Throughout this video we're going to break it all down and talk about all the things that happen when putting together these films. This includes Easter eggs, hidden details, little character moments, and it's basically a love letter to George Lucas's work. I hope you enjoy our journey through the movies, and if you do, then please hit that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe for videos like this every week, and with that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's go to a galaxy far, far away.
You're all clear, kid. Now let's blow this thing and go home.
Now, according to the legends, George Lucas came up with the idea after he made his first full-length feature film titled THX 1138. Lucas had been a big fan of the Flash Gordon serials, and he'd actually been planning to adapt them in some form or another. Apparently at the 1971 Cannes Film Festival, when he was showing THX, he started putting feelers out to see if he could buy the rights for Flash. However, they were owned by Dino De Laurentiis, and thus Lucas decided to do his own space opera. Returning home from the festival, Francis Ford Coppola recalled him being very depressed he couldn't get the rights, so in the end he said, "Well, I'll just invent my own." Great impression there, and pouring through John Carter of Mars, Gulliver on Mars in June, the ideas started to form in his head that would lead to what we got. Spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, he steamrolled through the ideas and found that the world building wasn't just something you could dive right into. Lucas said he made little notes, came up with names, and compiled a 2-page synopsis titled The Journal of the Whills. The Whills themselves were thought up as being spiritual and religious beings who recorded ancient tales and told them in the form of stories. This is why we started with A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, because it was meant to evoke the idea this is an ancient story being told to us. The Guardians of the Whills, of course, appeared in Rogue One, and they've become something that's connected to the greater legends. Telling the tale of an apprentice known as CJ Thorpe, this Jedi Bendu and his space commander Mace Windu would be who the story centered around. Now you probably sort of recognise that last name there, and though a lot of the names Lucas came up with didn't make it to the first script, he did end up including them in the later movies. The Jedi name itself came from the Samurai Jedi Geki, and these knights would follow an honor system like the Jedi. Now, realising that this original Whills story was too difficult to follow, he then started again from the ground up with the Star Wars. Sharing elements of Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, George put together a 13-page outline and then shopped it around. The Hidden Fortress actually gets a little nod in the film, with us getting this line from General Motti.
Your sad devotion to that ancient religion has not helped you conjure up the stolen data tapes, or given you clairvoyance enough to find the rebels' hidden fortress.
C-3PO and R2-D2 were also based off the bickering peasants, with the Imperial and Rebel logos also resembling Japanese crests. Originally, R2 could actually speak English, with him constantly cursing, and according to IMDb trivia, though his speech was removed, they kept C-3PO's reactions to him.
I've just about had enough of you.
Now Lucas unfortunately faced another knockback when United Artists declined the treatment. They said the budget was too big, and this was something the other studios shared as well. Lucas shopped the script to Paramount and Universal, with both thinking that it was way too ambitious.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Disney turned it down too, which cost them a couple billion decades later, but in the end, 20th Century Fox picked up the project. Lucas was given $150,000 to write and direct, which, looking back, is absolutely crazy. No one had faith in it, but this actually proved to be good for him because it allowed him to negotiate lots of things surrounding it. He secured the rights to the sequels, got most of the merchandising money, and also became best mates with everyone that hit the thumbs up button. Now by 1974, he'd done 4 different rewrites, swapping out characters and plot lines in search of a story. In these he'd created the Sith and Death Star, along with a general named Anakin Starkiller. Starkiller was then changed to a teen, and he became a side character to a family of dwarves. Yup, not joking, and Lucas did eventually use dwarves in Willow, which isn't the only idea that he saved for later. Han Solo was made, but he was a green-skinned alien with his homie Chewbacca, who was based on his dog. This just so happened to be called Indiana, which no prizes for guessing what he later used that on. Now George said he used to ride with his dog in the passenger seat next to him, and he'd often remark as him being like a co-pilot. Anakin was changed to Luke, with him then becoming his father, who was a former Jedi Knight that had died during the war. Luke and his brothers all lived on a farm, and it then evolved into a fairy tale fetch quest that took place across the galaxy. The Force was created, and this draft ended with a text scroll that talked about what was going to happen in the next movie. Again, you can kind of see where they shifted across, but one big text changed George's mind. That is Joseph Campbell's The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which is something that he's said to have been inspired by. And this is something we've brought up in a lot of breakdowns before, and it's a journey that Luke follows almost beat for beat. They also ended up taking elements of the legends of King Arthur, with Obi-Wan becoming a wizard echoing Merlin. C-3PO calls Luke Sir Luke.
I see, Sir Luke.
And Jedi Knight are of course based on Knight. No prizes if you got that one. Now by the third draft, things really started coming together, and at this point Lucas ended up pulling in Ralph McQuarrie. He started creating concept art, which you can find online, and a lot of this has been repurposed for different projects. For example, stuff like the Stormtrooper designs have been brought up as Easter eggs in other properties, and you can catch this as a bridge between the clones and the Stormtroopers in The Bad Batch. Now they're of course inspired by the Nazis, with a lot of the Imperial garb echoing their uniforms from World War II. Everything about them is rules and bureaucracy, which is why all the characters appear in black, white and grey. It's all very formal, whereas the Rebel characters that aren't connected to it have more of these sort of natural colours to them. Now in this draft, Darth Vader is pretty close to what we got, and we can also catch the evolution of Chewbacca. If you're a fan of Rebels, then you're going to instantly recognise the original design, and this is the same species that Zeb is in that show. C-3PO's design was inspired by Maria from Metropolis, and R2-D2's name was brought up on American Graffiti. The crew asked for reel number 2 of the second dialogue track, which ended up being R2-D2. All in all though, it's Han Solo who underwent the most changes, as the guy's got a lightsaber, big beard, cape and a headpiece, and to be honest, I've actually quite like this a lot. Now McQuarrie created lots of the ships in the set, and he pretty much set the look for the entire saga. This third draft was also where Luke's father died, and Lucas brought in Ben Kenobi to play as the character's mentor. Titled Star Wars The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, he worked with Gloria Katz and Willard Huck, and they finished that fourth draft in 1976. With help from Brian De Palma, Lucas cut down the text scroll, as originally they'd said it was long enough to cover an entire driveway. Lucas said he wanted it to come across almost like a poem, and that it had to convey a lot of information in as short a space as possible. Now this mimicked the Flash Gordon serials, which too opened up with one, and it even contained things like chapter titles and capitalized words, which Lucas would end up later bringing across to the series. Now the limited budget also helped Lucas with the look he was trying to attain, and rather than just going with new and shiny stuff, they gave the universe an almost battered lived-in look. This most notably carried across to the Millennium Falcon, with them using elements of scrap metal planes to build out the entire ship.
What a piece of junk!
In total, they built 30 sets over 9 sound stages at Elstree Studios, with this being one of the most expansive films of all time. The Rebel hangar was placed at Shepperton Studios in Europe, and finally after the film was cast, everything was ready to go. Now that takes us into the movie itself, with us getting that infamous title and text called to kick-start it off. Originally the movie was just titled Star Wars, but in later re-releases they added the episode count and the New Hope titling. We of course also hear John Williams' score blasting away, and like a lot of elements in this movie, it too was inspired by other works. Back when Philip Molina was at New Rockstars, he did lots of Star Wars breakdowns and pointed out that parts of the score riffed on the one from King's Row. Now from here we cut to space above the planet Tatooine and watch as the Tantive 4 desperately races across the galaxy. Looking minuscule and unimposing, it's completely dwarfed by the Star Destroyer, which comes in and engulfs the entire top half of the screen. In just this moment alone, we instantly get the David and Goliath stakes here, with the tiny rebel ship appearing minuscule compared to what's chasing it. The Tantive comes into the shot and disappears into the horizon in what I counted is roughly 2 seconds. Juxtaposing this, the Star Destroyer eats up the whole frame for a total of 11 seconds before we finally get to the point where we actually see its engines. That's an incredible time difference, and it shows Lucas's ingenuity when it comes to framing the two sides. We're immediately aware of how expansive and far-reaching the Empire's grasp is, and its tooth-shaped ship feels almost like the mouth of a shark closing around its prey. In the end, we can't even see the Tantive because it completely covers it up and lets us know these guys stand no chance. Now from here we get a front-facing view of it and watch as it gets battered. It tries to fire back, but this doesn't do any damage, whereas in the next shot we see as it's almost torn apart by one of the destroyer's blaster bolts. On the top we can see a rectangular satellite, and this design would later be brought across to the Millennium Falcon in the sequel trilogy. Both are Corellian craft, so that makes sense, especially with a Falcon containing lots of used parts. Also, I will reference some of the stuff in the later movies just to show how later things were recycled, because I'll probably never cover those films in depth, if I'm being honest. I'm not a massive fan of them, but I think I'd be remiss to not point out where certain lines and elements reappeared. Now that's actually important to bear in mind as well, because C-3PO's first line in the saga also ended up being his last line in Rise of Skywalker.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
I'll not keep harping on about those, but it is kind of interesting to see how retroactively things were changed. That scene in Vader himself, who originally was thought to have breathing apparatus as a way to travel through space. This was of course later changed to be due to injuries, with him becoming Luke's father. Originally Lucas actually wanted Orson Welles to provide Vader's voice, but he did feel like it might be too recognisable. Thus he settled with James Earl Jones, who was lesser known at the time, and David Prowse provided the physical performance and vocal work on set.
Start tearing this ship apart piece by piece until you find those tapes. Find the passengers of this vessel. I want them alive!
You know what you're talking about. I'm a member of the Imperial Senate on a diplomatic mission.
You are part of the Rebel Alliance and a traitor. Take her away.
Kind of funny looking back at this, and if this isn't what Vader sounds like in your head, mate, you're not a real fan. You're not a real fan! Now unfortunately, as much as I love joking about this, Prowse got really fucked over. The bodybuilder learned every line only to be told that his voice had been edited out. He brought so much to the role and was promised to actually get to show his face at some point down the line. However, come the end of Return of the Jedi, even that was taken away from him. Replaced by Sebastian Shaw, Prowse never got to show his face, and it is kind of a sore point for me when I look back at this role. I'm sure they did something recently where they, Channel 4 or something, they reshot the ending and had him in the costume for a sort of what if thing, but unfortunately, I couldn't find it online. Still though, he was brilliant, and I don't think Vader would have worked half as well without his physicality. Now C-3PO was also supposed to sound different too, with him being more along the lines of a used car salesman. Daniels performing the lines on set though was what won Lucas around, and his snooty British butler portrayals shaped the character going forward. Now in hindsight, we know from Rogue One how Princess Leia got the plans, and they based this guy around the person Vader strangles here. They also brought over his red eyes for that movie and a little part of the costume that you might not have noticed before. Here we can see that he actually has a sash over his shoulder piece, which too appears in that film. As for Carrie Fisher's costume, she wasn't allowed to wear underwear because you'd be able to see through her clothes and notice that she was wearing a bra and stuff. Carrie joked that she guessed there was no underwear in space, which Lucas then retorted by giving her a bikini in Return of the Jedi. Now you might also notice that C-3PO has a silver leg, and I did some research on exactly why this was. I discovered that when Anthony Daniels wore the costume for the first time that one of the leg pieces shattered and the plastic actually stabbed him in the foot. I don't think this is a replacement though, as the rumours say that was a left leg piece, and it might have just been a design choice, but yeah, if you know, yeah, let me know. Later on in the canon they'd state a bomb was placed into it, but the leg wasn't dipped in gold paint, but yeah. You know what, the comments section, it's perfect for stuff like this. Now C-3PO talks about the spice mines of Kessel.
What are we going to do? We'll be sent to the spice mines of Kessel or smashed into who knows what.
And as mentioned earlier, Lucas took elements of Dune, including spice, which is a hypnotic drug mined from Arrakis. Tatooine is based on that planet, and the voice was brought over to the Force, where Obi-Wan can Jedi mind trick stormtroopers just like how Paul can convince people to do stuff. Moisture farming is of course a big part of Dune as well, and that's of course what Luke and his family do on their farm. Now the spice mines appeared in Solo: A Star Wars Story, and it's here that we saw more of the Wookiee slaves. Later on, when Luke tries to put the handcuffs on Chewbacca, he seems genuinely angry even though he isn't on the plan. Now we know about them being enslaved, and people have theorized that's why he was angry, but yeah, whether that's the case or not is completely up to you. Interestingly, we were originally going to cut to Tatooine during this and get introduced to Luke watching the battle overhead. This scene introduced Biggs, who would later appear on Yavin, and he also inceptioned Luke with his plans of joining the rebellion. Now this took place at Tosche Station, which later appeared in the book of Boba Fett. During episode 2, we saw the couple Camie and Laser, who were brought across from this deleted scene. Now, the Tatooine scenes were also shot in Tunisia, with Tatooine being a real place that inspired the planet's name. Anyway, Leia gives over the plans and she's eventually stunned and taken in. Watching her peer around the corner, blaster raised high, is such an iconic shot, and it instantly lets you know everything you need to know about the character. I also love how Lucas had the foresight to change what the blaster bolts for this look like, and it's really clever how the stun blast spreads out almost like a net, or like there's some bowlers. These are of course used to capture things, and again it shows how much the imagery Lucas presents does a lot of the heavy lifting. Now 3PO and R2 manage to escape, which is when they crash land right below on the planet. After the pair split up, we can catch the skeleton of a crate dragon, which has of course appeared in lots of the expanded lore. Obi-Wan ends up mimicking the roar of one later on, and this has actually been changed and updated a lot of different times. Now apparently they didn't actually clean up the bones, and you can go and see them out in the desert. Kinda hoping in 1000 years, when people have forgotten about this film, that humans can come across it and just make up some shit about how there actually used to be crate dragons. Now this was actually the repurposed skeleton of a Diplodocus, which was a carryover from Disney's One of Our Dinosaurs is Missing. The pair splitting up leads to a cool moment with R2, and they actually reuse the sound of the Jawas here for the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. Now the Sandcrawler appears like a hulking giant structure, but this was actually a miniature that was about 2 foot tall. With some creative camera work though, they managed to make it an imposing behemoth, and inside we see several Star Wars droids. This includes an RA-7 protocol droid, which was nicknamed an insect droid or a Death Star droid depending on what you read. Later on, when they're waiting at the lift to go to the prison block, we can catch the same model walking along, showing how this costume was actually repurposed. There's also a periscope droid, and you can catch a gunk as well. These are basically walking batteries, and they've appeared in a number of films and spin-off projects, including The Bad Batch. Now in the desert we see stormtroopers riding on dewbacks, with this scene being reshot with added CGI for the 97 special editions. Originally they didn't have the budget to have them moving about, and lots of the dewbacks in the film were replaced with digital ones, so they had more animation to them. Now eventually the droids arrive at the farm, and Luke's Uncle Owen purchases C-3PO.
What I really need is a droid who understands the binary language of moisture evaporators.
Evaporators? Sir, my first job was programming binary load lifters, very similar to your evaporators in most respects.
In hindsight, we know that C-3PO was built by Anakin, and him having this functionality makes sense due to where Anakin lived. We also get this line,
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
which Hamill has said people constantly make fun of him about. Owen also tries to buy the droid R5, and lots of things have come from this moment, with there even being a non-canon comic about it that said the droid was actually force sensitive. Titled Skippy the Jedi Droid, this said R5 purposely self-sabotaged because it sensed that R2 had to meet with Luke. It's really funny, but R5 has of course been brought across to The Mandalorian, where it still carries its bust-up motivator. We watch C-3PO taking an oil bath and see Luke playing with a T-16 Skyhopper, which we can actually see the real-life version of to the right just behind him. In the expanded lore, Luke piloted this a lot, and it's something that he used to fly through Beggar's Canyon. This model actually appeared later in the saga, or earlier, because Obi-Wan gave it to Luke at the end of his Solo series. At this point in the hero's journey, we're hit with a call to action, which comes in the form of Leia's message. Luke clearly wants to go on adventures, but his uncle just wants him to work around the farm and drink blue milk. We'll not go into what happened with blue milk later down the line, but Mark Hamill actually said that the original blue milk in the film was what they call long life milk, and it was based on what you'd find in camping stores where you don't have to refrigerate it. Blue milk is actually taken from banthas, which we later meet along with the Tusken Raiders. Now their masks were based around World War II gas masks, namely the ones that British kids used to wear. Owen mentions Anchorhead, and this has been brought up in the expanded lore along with the Book of Boba Fett. It's a small town on Tatooine that offers some connection to other towns, namely Mos Eisley and Mos Espa. I also love how Lucas puts in a little line about his father that actually gets better after you watch the sequels.
Luke's just not a farmer, Owen. He has too much of his father in him.
That's what I'm afraid of.
As we mentioned, Lucas didn't originally have Vader as his dad, and this was just supposed to reference Anakin being a Jedi. However, in hindsight, it adds so much more to us, giving us the feeling that there's a worry he could go bad. Luke then looks out over the binary sunset, which instantly hits every Star Wars fan right in the feels. This idea of looking over the horizon and longing for a life of excitement is something I think everyone can relate to. We're also hit with the two alien suns, giving us the feeling that something's magical about this world. On top of that, the score does a lot of the heavy lifting, and it just makes this scene one of the best in the entire saga. It's no wonder every trilogy in the series has mimicked this scene, and both the prequel and sequels end with a moment like this. Turn it off, mate, I'm gonna cry. Anyway, Luke goes back to C-3PO and he finds him standing in the dark next to a V-35 landspeeder. This is what we later see upon entering Mos Eisley, with the prop being used to build out the world. We discover R2 has escaped and Luke ends up going out looking for him in his landspeeder, which is an X-34. Back in the day, they of course couldn't CGI out the wheels, so they used a mirror and then rubbed Vaseline onto the lens to hide it. Eventually, they reached some banthas, and these were actually elephants dressed in bantha guard with fake fur and horns. They obviously weren't used to the heat, and apparently on set they kept pulling this off. They're then ambushed by Tusken Raiders, with Lucas having to play a shot and then reverse it, so the Raiders seem like they were on screen for longer. R2 ends up hiding away at this point, and this is something they've updated for the re-releases. Originally, he wasn't hiding behind that many rocks, but they added more ones in digitally. But there is just one problem, mate. How did he get in there? Anyway, Obi-Wan then saves them and says,
"Hello there."
This is something the characters repeated throughout the saga, with it sort of becoming like the character's catchphrase.
Hello there.
Hello there.
Now Obi-Wan then takes Luke to his home and tells him about his father. He shows him his lightsaber, which he pulls from a wooden chest. Now this was actually later used in 1978 Superman, with it being the box that the kryptonite was stored in. At this point, the Clone Wars are mentioned as well, and we also get a bit of backstory on the Jedi.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the Dark Times. Before the Empire.
Also, we can see there's a little mark on Obi-Wan's shoulder. Retroactively, it's been said that this happened during the battle with Anakin, and he took this wound to the shoulder, which has then remained on his robes. Now from here we cut to the Death Star, which again symbolic of the Empire's dominance in the galaxy. Resembling a mechanical moon, this shows how they've stripped out all life and replaced it with unfeeling machinery. That's very much the case with Darth Vader too, with him no longer being a man and he's more like a machine. Now, bit of behind the scenes trivia that strips away how threatening this all is. Tarkin's boots didn't actually fit, so a lot of these scenes with him were shot from the waist up, with him then wearing slippers. Now it's kind of wild looking back to Vader knowing what we know now, and they full on just disrespected the man and called his religion stupid. You forget how much of a lackey Vader was in this movie, but eventually he'd be shifted to become the most important character in the franchise. Dressed in white, we can also see Wolf Yularen, who's a big character in the expanded lore. Now Leslie Schofield is also there as well, who is an actor that appeared in a lot of British stuff, and we also have Cassio Taj, who's cameoed in a lot of the expanded stories. Anyway, back to the Sandcrawler. Obi-Wan talks about how precise the blaster bolts are, which means it's Imperial, but I don't know, mate, them stormtroopers, they don't seem like they could hit the subscribe button on a brilliant breakdown, eh? Now Luke finds out his uncle and auntie have been roasted, like Mark Hamill's performance of
But I was going into Tashi Station to pick up some power converters.
And from here, we then cut to Leia. A torture droid is brought in, and this has become a mainstay in Imperial interrogations. As we later learn,
her resistance to the mind probe is considerable. It'll be some time before we can extract any information from her.
Which in hindsight we could attribute to her being force sensitive. Back with Luke and Ben, we see Ben's gutted that Luke's family's been killed, and it now means that he's got to follow him on this adventure. What do you mean he also tried to kill his dad? Anyway, they head out to Mos Eisley, and Lucas of course vastly changed this with the release of the special editions. As they go in, we see Womp Rats before cutting to the main city, which has a rebel ship behind it. We can also catch the Dowager Queen, which, according to the legends, crash-landed on the planet. As they drive in, we can also see Dash Render's ship, the Outrider, leaving Mos Eisley. Star of the N64 game Shadows of the Empire, Render's gained a cult following, and this is such a cool little addition. There's also a swoop bike from that game which passes by a Ronto, and this scares it into dropping its chowers. Honestly, I feel like they just kind of went a bit mental with the CGI on this in later years, and every frame just has stuff flying around non-stop getting in the way. They started asking whether they could and didn't think about whether they should, which leaves it kind of feeling just a bit of a mess to me. Anyway, they head to the Mos Eisley Cantina, which is meant to resemble an old-timely Western one. C-3PO is ordered out of it, and retroactively this was said to be because of tensions with droids raised during the Clone Wars.
Why?
It's said in the book from a certain point of view that the bartender's family were actually killed by battle droids. Also, I'm sure you know, but just in case you don't, the canteens on the bar were later repurposed to be used as the head of IG-88. The cantina really brings the universe to life, I feel, and there's a ton of different aliens here that help flesh out the world. So many creatures, and of course the cantina band, which just helps to add character to the universe. Now, amongst the aliens, we get Ponda Baba and Dr. Cornelius Everson, who ended up cameoing in Rogue One. Obi-Wan shows how deadly that a lightsaber can be, and I love how it immediately kills the mood in the bar before people just return back to their drinks. This reminds me a lot of a Western cantina shootout where there'd be a quick draw and then everyone would just put their heads down and avoid making trouble. At this point, we meet Han Solo and Chewbacca. Lucas brought over Harrison Ford from American Graffiti, but originally he wasn't supposed to star in the film. In auditions, Lucas used Ford as someone who would read lines with the other actors, but he quickly realised he was the best person for the job. He's sort of the quote-unquote Han Solo of the Star Wars saga, and yeah, what a bloody geezer. Now, he talks about how the Millennium Falcon did the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, which caused a number of people to be like,
"What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?"
This is because parsecs are a measure of distance and not time. However, in Solo, they had him complete it by going through the mall, which shortened the distance down. Now, that's been done retroactively, but in the line, I actually found a script showing that Ben reacted in disbelief at this clear misinformation. Luke doesn't because he hasn't been in space, so it was a nice little touch I realised upon reading the screenplay. Now, from here, Han runs into Greedo, which is something that Lucas has changed multiple times. Whether he shot first, Greedo shot first, I don't even know at this point, but he's added in things like digital dodging, misses, even though Greedo's that opposite. And yeah, what a mess. To me, I'll always see him as shooting first, and that's because he's a scoundrel that's always one step ahead. Lucas said he realised though that Han should be a more noble cowboy like John Wayne, but yeah, people, they can go on character arcs, mate.
I bet you have. McClunky.
Now, the latest Disney updates added in the line McClunky, which was a McClunky thing to do, but it's becoming clear that this scene's constantly going to get updated. Now, Greedo actually reappears in the scene with Jabba the Hutt later on, and this too's been updated numerous times throughout the years. Originally, it wasn't part of the film's theatrical release, and that was purely down to the movie's budget. They actually filmed the scene with an actor and had the intention to put a stop-motion creature over him, and originally was going to look like a humanoid, and then they'd figure out the design in post. However, again, due to those budget and time constraints, they had to scrap it, and thus Lucas ended up writing around this scene. Paul Blake, who played Greedo, said his scene was then written, and this was as a result of having to cut this moment. Now, he actually got a deleted scene in The Phantom Menace with a young Greedo that, yeah.
Chispa Cooper Greedo, Inagua Co Crespa Crita.
And the Jabba scene also gained the addition of Boba Fett in the 97 release. They had Han step on his tail to solve him walking around the back of Jabba, and this is also something I think they're constantly going to update. You can catch a white droid to the right, and this was reused from the wreckage of the Sandcrawler. Now, we can also catch the alien Garindan spying on them, and his voice was actually made up of processed recordings of John Wayne. This actually marks this as being the actor's last appearance in something, and he sadly passed away in 1979. Now, later on, as Luke goes into the hangar, we can also see a 94 placed onto the wall. Arabic would become a language in Return of the Jedi, but in the original release, they just used English. In the cockpit, we can see Han's golden dice, which has become an iconic prop in the saga, and we watch as the stormtroopers close in. On the Death Star, we see as Tarkin threatens to destroy Alderaan, and you could say the people here end up in Alderaan places. Maybe Leia should stop Tarkin.
Boo! You suck!
And the planet, of course, popped up in Obi-Wan, and Leia gives the name of the Rebels' base as being on Dantooine. This actually turned out to be true from a certain point of view, and Rogue One was going to show the Rebels escaping the planet before moving to Yavin. Either way, Tarkin still decides to blow it up, and if you slow down the blast hitting the planet, you can actually catch its atmosphere set on fire before the beam hits the body. Cut to Obi-Wan, and we immediately see him grabbing his chest as he senses all the deaths. As a kid, I never really drew the connections to nuclear weapons, but this is happening roughly 30 years after the first atom bomb was dropped. As an adult, I do wonder whether Lucas saw this as an eventual conclusion of warfare, and planetary destruction is the way we're destined to go. Now we also see Luke practicing with his lightsaber against a Marksman H flying remote. These would appear in the sequels and prequels, and they became a pretty standard way for Jedis to train. We also see the hollow chessboard, and originally they wanted 2 extra pieces on here. However, VFX artist Phil Tippett said it felt too cluttered, so these were removed. In Solo, we see Chewie breaking the table, and these 2 pieces fall off as a nod to this cut. The chessboard also gets shut off, and in The Force Awakens, they actually pick up from this movie and then finish out the animations. At this point, the ship's pulled into the Death Star, and they have to hide under the floor. Lucas, of course, had Han as a smuggler, so it makes sense these compartments would be part of his ship. Sneaking into the base disguised as stormtroopers, we also see on the back of the uniforms that they have tubes on them. In the original Ralph McQuarrie designs, the guards all had their own lightsabers, which this tube was originally meant to be. Luke later says,
"I can't see a thing in this helmet,"
which was actually improvised by Mark Hamill. It said he couldn't see out the helmet, and in the end they kept the line in. Obi-Wan eventually ends up leaving them, and we get this line.
Well, you said it, Chewie. Where did you dig up that old fossil?
In the script, we know this line is him actually saying, "The old man's gone mad," and Chewbacca also ends up scaring off a mouse droid, which was apparently made up on set on the day. Going to the prison block, they then give the number
1138,
which is a callback to Lucas's THX 1138. They also say
2187,
which also ended up being Finn's number in The Force Awakens, aka FN2187. Nice little detail. If we go back to just before Han, Chewie and Luke left the droids, we can see THX 1138 on the screen on the monitor behind them. Now, according to the rumours, Harrison Ford actually refused to learn his lines for this part as he wanted the conversation to come off as being spontaneous.
But everything's perfectly all right now. We're fine. We're all fine here now. Thank you. How are you?
In the trash compactor, we see a Dianoga, which actually ended up becoming a big boss in Shadows of the Empire. The game also showed off the actual true size of it, with these tentacles being something that could have pulled Luke to his death. Filming wasn't too easy either, and Hamill actually burst a blood vessel from holding his breath for so long. Now the door here was actually the same one as the one on the Tantive 4, with it being painted white to be used on that set. The scenes on the ship were actually shot after this, and due to the budget, they had to reuse parts of the sets in order to film other parts of the movie. Now, upon escaping, Hamill kept insisting that he should have his hair constantly matted down due to the water, and according to IMDb trivia, Harrison Ford said, "Kid, it ain't that kind of movie. If they're looking at your hair, we're all in big trouble." Now, alongside the trash compactor scene, we get a playful little gaffe when the stormtroopers finally get to 3PO and R2. I'm sure everyone knows about the stormtrooper banging their head, but originally this wasn't noticed until after its release. In later editions, Lucas actually added a little sound effect on it.
"Hey, come over. Hey, come over. Hey, come over."
It just kills me a bit they added this in, and Lucas later had Jango also bang his head when entering Slave One in Attack of the Clones. Now, one thing you might notice is that they kept the stormtrooper belts, and this allows Luke to rappel with Leia across one of the chasms. Shooting a stormtrooper, we also get what's the first Wilhelm scream in the saga. This has appeared in, I think, every Star Wars project, with it sort of becoming like a running gag. Also, this kind of set up the rule of door controls in Star Wars being something you can shoot to lock a door, but if the door's locked and you need it to open, you can also shoot it, and just depending whatever the writer needs at the time, it's going to work like that. Just shoot the panel. Now, Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher actually performed this stunt for real, with them getting the swing in one take without the need for stunt doubles. Such a cool scene, and it segues perfectly into Obi-Wan versus Vader. This of course carries a lot with it, and over the years it's become one of the most referenced duels in Star Wars. The original version, it was kind of all over the place, with the sword shattering at several points during filming. Also, when they clashed, a weird green light would strike up the recording, and Obi-Wan's blade remained almost white due to the rotoscoping not really being there. Now, this is one thing they really cleaned up in the re-releases, with the colouring being added to the blades and the green glow being cut down. Now, originally, this was the only meeting between the pair since Obi-Wan beat and mutilated him. However, the Disney Plus series completely retconned all that. Based on samurai fights, this was originally slow, methodical, and deliberate, with all the strikes intended to be killing blows. Now, what I love about its ending is that the last thing Obi-Wan sees is Luke and Leia reunited. He glances over and sees them safe before sacrificing himself and letting Vader deal a killing blow so he can become one with the Force. I love how in hindsight Obi-Wan was there when they were born and he was instrumental in splitting them up to hide them from their father. In the end, he gets to see them back together, and his final act is buying them time to get away from their dad. Again, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme, and from here the group then make a break for it. Now, all the battles in space were inspired by World War II cockpit footage to add this feeling of authenticity to the dogfights. Attacked by TIE fighters, this stands for twin ion engines, which has retroactively been given to it because at the time Lucas called it that because it looked like a bow tie. Vader, of course, has his own one later on, and this was done to help the audience distinguish which one he was in. From here they then reach Yavin 4, and the outside of this was filmed at the Mayan Temple Gardens in Guatemala. At this point, we see the Death Star plans, which were lost to time after the movie wrapped. Thus, they never had this as an asset and had to rebuild them from the ground up to be used in Rogue One. That movie actually retroactively sets up some stuff in this scene, with Red 5 being killed at the battle above Scarif. That film includes stock footage from this movie as well, and it also finally gives us Blue Squadron. Now, originally, Red Squadron was going to be blue, but with the blue screen backgrounds, they ended up having to change it. Now, the numbers were given because on the wings of the ship, you'd have extra stripes denoting the numbers. Unfortunately, when Lucas redid all these scenes digitally, all the models were replaced with identical wings. Now, they head out, and Ben talking to Luke in the cockpit would throw me off. I'm not gonna lie. Man's voice just drops in out of nowhere as he's taking off, and it's like,
Luke, the Force will be with you.
You could have legitimately crashed off that, mate. And there's also Porkins, who you might recognise from the movie Batman. Either way, it leads to a big battle in the trench, which is based off the film The Dam Busters. It's mistakenly thought that the trench is a line that runs right along the centre of it, but if we look at the plans, you can see that the trench is actually located at the north pole of the station. Darth Vader comes in, and if you look at his helmet in some shots, you can actually see David Prowse's eyes in there. Now, we are of course also introduced to Wedge Antilles, played by Dennis Lawson, and he's actually the uncle of Ewan McGregor. Now, the first shot the rebels takes misses, and it means that Luke has to be the one to come in and save the day. A nice little detail is that later on when he shoots at the target, you can actually see the mark of the miss in the top left of the screen. Vader closes in, but he gets saved by Han, and in the end uses the Force instead of his targeting computer. He hits the bullseye like it's the like button, and we end with them blowing this thing and then going home. I know it's cliche for Han to come in last minute and save the day, but something about this just hits so hard, and it's one of my favourite moments in the entire saga. There's so many different elements going on here, and it just makes the scene in the sense of alleviation so tense. You've got the Death Star getting in range to fire at the base, R2 gets taken out, Luke turns off his targeting computer, and Vader's on his arse like the neglectful father that he always was. He gets him in his sight, and then Han comes in last minute and just wrecks shop.
Have you not? What?
Look out!
Love the score here as well, and it just drives home the triumph as we see the Death Star explode and Tarkin along with it. Vader, of course, gets away after his TIE spins out of there, and Lucas had a real battle to keep this shot in the movie. People behind the scenes felt it set up a sequel, which at the time were considered inferior cash-ins. As we know though, it of course got kept, leading us to be able to get the character back in Empire. Now Luke returns home to a hero's welcome, and though R2 is busted up, he's gonna be okay. I actually wonder if they messed him up because of the blue screen, cause they had to darken his colours down for the space scenes, again for that blue background. Messing him up just takes the focus off, but yeah, that might be wrong and just one big reach. Now they're all presented with medals, and I'll always remember this ending getting carried over to Star Fox 64. Chewie doesn't get one, which was a big sore point for the franchise, but he does at least get the last line in the movie. Now Peter Mayhew, who played him, actually worked as an orderly at a hospital whilst filming the first 3 movies, but he gained a ton of publicity off the back of this role. Eventually he realised he could just make a living off appearances, and he decided to go and do that full time. Now this was such a revolutionary film that changed how sci-fi was made from this point, and it's hard to deny how influential it was. I still think A New Hope is my second favourite film in the saga, with it only being topped by what comes next. It's an incredible start to the story, and it's got so many things in it that it's difficult not to marvel at how well it's made. This is a movie that was meant to be a nightmare in post-production, but it was famously saved in the edit. Lucas couldn't do reshoots because Mark Hamill suffered a car accident, and they ran into roadblock after roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. George Lucas, he was so sure this movie was gonna bomb, he actually went on vacation in Hawaii instead of showing up at the premieres. Here with Steven Spielberg, they came up with the idea for Indiana Jones, which, to be fair, wasn't a wasted trip. As for this, it was the first movie to take $300 million at the box office, and in total it sold over 178 million tickets. This is across all of its various different runs, with it only being beaten by Gone with the Wind. The most that 20th Century Fox had made before this was $37 million in a year, but this movie saw their end profits being $79 million. The cast lucked out along with Lucas as well, and he gave Alec Guinness an extra 0.25% of the gross, which turned out to be an additional $2 million payday for him. In the end, I think it's impossible to deny how much this movie changed cinema, and I still love it as much now as I did all the way back when I was a kid. Just watching it takes me back to those days, playing with Star Wars micro machines whilst I had the movie playing in the background. It's one of those films that shaped my entire life, and I hope you guys have enjoyed this breakdown as much as I have.
The Empire Strikes Back.
Now, A New Hope came as a massive surprise to everyone, most notably George Lucas. Expecting it to be a bomb, he didn't even go to the premiere, and instead he vacationed with Steven Spielberg whilst the movie was being shown. Whilst the pair were away though, they came up with the idea for Indiana Jones, and George felt like this next project might save his reputation. However, as we know, Star Wars was an incredible phenomenon, and after it blew up the box office, it also achieved a Best Picture nomination. Star Wars earned more money than any other movie it ever made in history, and thus a sequel was quickly put into production. Now if you checked out our last video, then you'll know how stressed out Lucas was when he was making that first film. That had a severe impact on his health, and he knew that a sequel was going to have to be bigger and better. If he made the movie, he'd have to work out the finances, run the production company, and also be there every day directing it. This would undoubtedly lead to a much bigger toll, and thus he decided to put things in place to take a step back whilst overseeing the production. Lucas actually toyed with selling the rights to the sequels off to 20th Century Fox, but in the end he felt like it couldn't be entrusted with others, moving on. Now, using the $12 million he made from A New Hope, he decided to put that money into his production company ILM, and he also set up Skywalker Movie Ranch out in California. Taking out a bank loan, he also self-financed the film and went for a budget of $25 million, which was double the first movie. Written by Hurley from Lost, Lucas worked away in his ranch on the screenplay, whilst concept art was created for completely alien locations that were the opposite of the first film. Lucas wanted to do more than just rehash that movie, so he had Luke training as a Jedi and also a romance between Han and Leia. Now, Lucas originally offered the director's job to David Lynch, but he turned it down due to his surrealist style not matching with Lucas's vision. Lynch later went on to make 1984's Dune, which, though I enjoy, was a pretty major flop. Now, taking his old teacher Irvin Kershner to lunch, he pitched him the idea, but this was initially turned down.
And I said, gee, George, I don't think so.
Kershner was someone who was known for small character-driven indie films, but this is why he felt that he'd be perfect for the role. Convinced by his agent, he then got to work, and the crew created 60 sets, which vastly outweighed the first film. Although this movie, it was going to be big and bombastic, it was very much a character piece that would see the heroes at their lowest points. Now to me, this has always been the appeal of Empire, and Lucas went through numerous idea changes when putting it all together. He wanted to include the Emperor in a big bad way, but he also had to explain how Mark Hamill had suffered facial injuries. Hamill actually got into a very serious car accident just after filming the first movie, and this actually left Lucas unable to reshoot parts of it. Lucas had apparently told them that had he died, then they would have recast him, and then focused the story on Luke's long-lost sister. You can kind of see how that would play into the future, and Hamill apparently got told at one point that his sister was in fact Leia. Now, they ended up explaining the slight change in Hamill's appearance through the Wampa attack as the surgery adjusted his face a bit from how it looked in the first film. He got a fractured nose and also a cheekbone, but to be honest, I never really noticed the difference, and yeah, let me know if you picked up on it. I'm sure you've heard the rumours though about them purposely shooting that scene to explain the scars, but at the time, most of them had healed up. That whole story is a bit of bantha poodoo, and the scene would have been in the film anyway, as they needed a way to have Obi-Wan return to tell him to go to Dagobah. Now, these scenes were all shot without them actually knowing if Alec Guinness would return, and had he not, then they would have been completely f***ed.
Hello there.
Now, Lucas actually hired science fiction writer Lee Brackett to help punch up the dialogue, and they worked away and came up with the core ideas. Firstly, there'd be something on the Wookiee homeworld, the Emperor, a gambler from Han's past, a frog-like creature, and someone called Minch Yoda. The name Yoda was taken from the Sanskrit word Yodha, which translates to English to mean warrior. Now, after some changes, there was a city in the cloud added, the snow planet Hoth, and a chase through an asteroid belt. There was also a battle between Luke and Vader, and originally they wanted the ghost of Anakin to visit his son and be accompanied by Obi-Wan. Now, this is where stuff starts to differ, and it was from here that things diverted off completely. Han was going to go on to recruit his powerful stepfather, and Lando was going to be revealed to be a clone from the Clone Wars. Lucas made notes and tried to reach out to Brackett, but she sadly was hospitalized and died of cancer just a few weeks later. Now, because of this, Lucas's hands were tied, and after bringing Lawrence Kasdan on, they then reworked the script. Actually enjoying the process this time, Lucas made changes based off her work, but in the end, he struggled to close out the third act. Instead, he flirted with the idea of dropping in Vader's castle and his fear of the Emperor, which gets brought across the main film. Vader's big thing is, of course, trying to get his son to join him, and he very much gives away that they can rule a galaxy together. That would be without the Emperor, and there was plans in place that the pair would join up and then fight him together.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
Now, bounty hunters were also brought in to track down Luke, and at this point they started conceptualizing Boba Fett. He was going to be based on the man with no name, and this is actually why the sounds of spurs are used when he's on screen. Introduced in the Star Wars Holiday Special, there were also plans at one point to give him an all-white costume. Lucas testing this out can be seen in certain images, with the idea being that he could be named the Super Stormtrooper. They also bring across the scalp of a Wookiee, which Jeremy Bulloch kept brushing out the way because he thought it was a dislodged hairpiece. This is all discussed in his autobiography Flying Solo, not lying, where he talked about how he also played an Imperial in the movie who drags Leia out the way. The actor who was supposed to play him didn't end up showing up, and thus Bulloch stepped out of the costume to play this minor part. Imagine, right, all the bragging rights and the work that guy could have got off the back of being an Empire, and he literally had one job and couldn't even do that. Now, Fett does appear in the special edition of A New Hope when Han meets Jabba, but it's important to bear in mind that that was added in with CGI. Now, in Brackett's draft, she also had Obi-Wan telling Luke to leave his training, whereas Lucas felt it gave Luke more agency to decide to do it himself. The scene in the cave with a vision of Vader was also reworked too, and originally Luke's flirting with the dark side was shown completely differently. Luke was going to wildly massacre stormtroopers, which somewhat got reused down the line when Anakin murdered the Tusken Raiders.
I killed them. I killed them all. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
Alright mate, calm down.
I hate them!
Titling it The Empire Strikes Back, Minch Yoda was reworked to, well, you guessed it, and originally this was going to be a slimy swamp creature. He was supposed to show Luke to not judge a book by its cover, with them eventually combining him with the frog-like creature planned in the original outline. Stuart Freeborn designed him, and I tell you, when you see him in this video, mate, you're going to instantly recognise the resemblance.
Joel showed me a few original sketches, and I thought, well, that's interesting, but I want something in more depth, you see. And so I looked in the mirror, and I thought, well, something perhaps a little bit amusing about my face. So I modelled something of myself. Now I've got to make him look intelligent. I got this photograph of Einstein and put the Einstein wrinkles in all around. I did a lot of thinking about it, because he's got to be full of subtle action and movements, especially in the face and the body. And put it all in, what was necessary, and then finally it all worked.
Now, Frank Oz really struggled with it because until this point, there'd never been a movie done at this scale with a realistic character portrayed by a puppet. They also had sound issues with Hamill being unable to hear Yoda's voice because Frank Oz had to be several feet below the set. They had to use earpieces, which they covered with his hair, but in the end, that even caused issues itself.
I had an earpiece where I could hear, "Oh, many years have you..." And then if you turned your head the wrong way, you'd pick up Radio 1, and it was the Rolling Stones singing Fool to Cry.
Lucas said the entire movie either lived or died on Yoda, and it's kind of a miracle that they managed to get it right.
Too old to begin the training.
I'm not afraid.
Oh, you will be. You will be. Sorry. Problems.
Snakes on the set also caused trouble too, with one even biting Hamill at one point. I'm tired of these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking set, and beyond that, Hamill got really annoyed. According to IMDb trivia, he had to bang his head 16 times on Yoda's hut before Kirshner finally got the reaction he was after, and from what I've heard, the guy was completely miserable on set. He was the only actor on the call sheet for 99% of these parts, and he spent a lot of the movie on his own, away from the other actors. Now, Frank Oz originally wasn't supposed to provide Yoda's voice, but Lucas ended up enjoying the performance, and thus he stuck with it. Lucas actually pushed for Oz to get a Best Supporting Actor Oscar, but they ultimately rejected it because he was just puppeteering. Ironically, he voiced Kermit the Frog and Ms. Piggy, and when they were designing Yoda, Lucas said he saw the creature as being their illegitimate child. Now, the voice thing is similar to what happened with C-3PO in the first film, with Anthony Daniels also winning Lucas round. Now, out of the whole cast, only Hamill and Fisher were signed on for sequels, with Ford refusing to do a multi-picture deal due to bad experiences in the past. He actually wanted his character to get killed off, and the reason he was frozen in carbonite was because they genuinely didn't know whether he'd do a third film. Lucas, of course, refused to outright kill Han, and he promised Ford a much bigger heroic part for that third film. David Prowse was also very apprehensive too, with him feeling like he was more of just a prop rather than being an actual performer. Prowse's voice was of course replaced by James Earl Jones, but fearing they might recast if he refused, he ended up signing on. Earl Jones actually felt bad for taking money for his work in the movie, and he apparently refused to be credited when the film was first released. He also only accepted $15,000 pay for what he saw as being just a couple of hours in a recording booth. Alec Guinness was someone who also didn't take a salary, and instead he got 0.25% of the film's final gross. Due to his failing eyesight, he only worked a couple of hours on set, and this was seen as a way that both sides could win. This is of course a similar deal to what he had on A New Hope, but even a 0.25% ownership of this led to big bucks. In the end, Guinness earned over $100 million, which is equivalent to about $370 million today.
Hello there.
Now, as always, the production was plagued with problems too, and though they had space booked out at Elstree Studios, this clashed with the filming of The Shining. That took up most of the space there, and the Star Wars team were forced to give up 2 stages so that they could then film. They actually pulled across some of the snow sets from that movie though, and a couple of moments on Hoth are pieces from that film. Poor weather delayed the construction though, and this was also seen in Norway where they filmed some of the Hoth scenes. Getting hit with the worst snowstorm in half a century, the production was blasted with blizzards and 40-mile-an-hour winds. Camera lenses iced over and paint froze in its tin, making everything even more difficult than it was shooting on Tatooine. Now, being shot in Norway, little bit of heavy spoilers trivia. Our own Simon A. Berman, who helped us out on our Bad Batch videos, his godfather Ian Liston actually played Wes Jensen. Simon actually helps make movies out of Norway, and he's massively helped out this channel, so it was really cool getting hit with this extra bit of heavy spoilers history. Now that takes us into the movie itself, which begins with the text of episode 5 in the classic title crawl. Back in 1977, A New Hope didn't actually come with that name, and instead the movie was just titled Star Wars. Adding this in gave the idea that it was a grander story, and upon re-releases, Lucas then added in the episode 4 and New Hope titling. Now I don't know if it's just me, but watching the 4K Blu-ray on my OLED really made the space scenes pop this week, with the stars burning and blinking in the background, and making that title crawl really stand out. Beginning with the text, "It's a dark time for the rebellion," this instantly lets us know the tone for the film, and that'll be taking things down to its lowest point. The movie actually bummed a lot of people out upon its release, and it received quite a few negative reviews for where it took the characters. You can kind of see why, as the first movie was so upbeat, and it started the grand tradition of people complaining about Star Wars. No one hates Star Wars more than Star Wars fans, and Lucas actually issued an apology for how it made people feel. After cutting to the Imperials, we once more see a Star Destroyer and watch his probe droids ascend searching for Skywalker. Like bugs descending and spreading out, we learn the Empire sent thousands of these across the galaxy, desperately hunting for him. The idea of them being like insect bug things is of course carried across to their design, with the appearance of them even appearing spider-like due to all the eyes. Whereas, I know it's an arachnid, yeah, but whereas the first film tried to do the comedic duo of 3PO and R2 to start the film, this probe droid has a far more sinister side to it. If you read the transcripts, you can actually figure out what it's saying, and the line apparently is, "Scan into the system, I can see the rebel base." Now the probe going to Hoth echoes the shot in A New Hope of the escape pod crashing down on Tatooine. This gives us the idea this movie will be an opposite of the first, as that had a hot desert planet, whereas this is a barren iceland. You should have called it Kolth.
He said it!
Anyway, NASA actually have a planet on their radar that they've nicknamed Hoth, which is a super-Earth planet orbiting a sun 3,000 light years away. Now in the intro, we actually get two things crashing down, with the first probe landing before we cut to Luke riding a Tauntaun. Luke sees another thing come crashing down, and this has always made me wonder whether this is two probes or if it's the same one. The screenplay actually clears it up, with it stating that we see it before we cut to Luke's perspective of the exact same event. Personally, Steven Spielberg over here, I probably would have just done the one, but I guess it would have been weird to show the probe droid hatching in between these moments before we then get the Wampa attack. The Tauntauns were originally designed to look lizard-like, but due to how cold it was, the creative team made them carry across sheep qualities to keep them warm. When crafting the creatures, they looked at a lot of different designs, with them originally settling on the beast that the Necron 99 rode in the 1970s film Wizards. At this point, Luke gets attacked by the Wampa, who itself was based on the Abominable Snowman. Is it abominable? Now, filming with these creatures was a complete nightmare, and Lucas ended up having to cut around a lot of them due to how bad they looked on camera. For the special edition, they went back and reshot several moments with them, including the cave scene, which was originally completely absent of the moments where it's crouched down eating something. They made a much smaller set for this so that the Wampa would seem bigger, with ILM's Howie Weed playing the part of the creature. Lucas originally only wanted to do a special edition version of A New Hope, but they saw the benefits of re-releasing these movies due to the big bucks they got back on them. However, he was kind of pushed time-wise to get the other ones done, which is why both this and Jedi have fewer changes in them. Now, Wampas were going to play a much bigger part, and originally there were going to be some lines of dialogue where we discovered that they'd attacked Echo Base. At one point when Han's walking to find out about Luke, you can catch a dead one on the ground, and this was supposed to be in the aftermath of one of their ambushes. There was also a deleted scene involving Wampas trapped in a room, which C-3PO would use as a way to trick some of the snowtroopers. Now, Luke hanging upside down is a motif that repeats throughout the movie, and it always comes at transformative points in his life. The first time here's him reaching out and using the Force to pull his lightsaber, which is the first time we'd seen something like this in the saga. This then leads to Ben speaking directly to him, and this is so he can move on to the next part of his training. That involves Yoda, with him doing an upside down handstand, and once more having to tap into the Force as part of that training. The last time comes after he learns Vader is his father, and he hangs upside down underneath Cloud City. In order to escape this, he has to use the Force to speak to Leia, and again, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. Now, Luke's costume here also highlights his changing, with it being a mix between grey and white. This is something that we see evolve throughout the original trilogy, with a character wearing all white in that very first movie. Come the end of this, it's shifted to fully grey, with Jedi being where he ends up donning all black. It's a really good progression of his colour scheme, and it also hints to the audience that he loses the innocence he's once had. Now, cutting off the Wamba's arm, this neatly foreshadows his hand being lost, and it slips in the idea that lightsabers can do this. I know that it happened with Obi-Wan in the last movie, but they're really hammering it home here, so it fits in with the end. Now, when Luke escapes, we watch him run out into a blizzard, which was a real one happening in the area. The crew talked about how they all huddled in huts whilst Hamill had to do this, and they taunted him about him freezing his nuts off. Now at Echo Base, we hear Solo mentioning Jabba the Hutt, and also the bounty hunter on Ord Mantell.
I thought you had decided to stay.
Well, the bounty hunter we ran into when Ord Mantell changed my mind.
This is somewhere that you visit in Shadows of the Empire, with Dash Rendar riding on the back of a train to take him to the central pod of the junkyard. Upon arriving there, you face off against IG-88, which was clearly riffing on this line from Empire. The story with the group running into a bounty hunter would later be explained with a radio show titled Rebel Mission to Ord Mantell. This dropped in 1983 and it featured most of the original cast and retold this story. We actually get a bit of a clue to the rivalry between the bounty hunters later on, and you can actually catch what looks like IG-88 on Cloud City. In the room where the Ugnaughts are dismantling the droid, if you look just by the furnace, you can actually see the machine lying there. Now, in the expanded lore, it was explained that IG-88 arrived at Cloud City Tailing Fair, which is when the pair duked it out with the latter winning. However, there's conflicting reports over this, with it also being said to be IG-86. In Shadows of the Empire, Dash actually destroys 88, so yeah, you can kind of pick your poison with that and decide who this body is for you. Now, we also get the romance between Han and Leia, which is played up a ton throughout this entire movie. Canonically, this is set 3 years after the first film, and Lucas wanted to put these characters together, which is why they barely share scenes with Luke. There is still that whole thing with the kiss though, which will just chalk up to being based on Greek myths. To be fair, neither knew that they were related, and it does kind of push Han and Leia to accept that they like each other. Now, Carrie Fisher actually stood in a box for a lot of her scenes with Ford, because it turned out he was an entire foot taller than her. Now, I love Han's moments where he's getting annoyed by Chewie because they just want to leave, and though he's wanting to sort things out with Jabba, the mood changes when he learns Luke's missing. You really get the friendship that these people have built between the movies, with Han genuinely worried that Luke's out on his own. I'm not sure what the whole idea of hell in this universe is based around, but even Han saying this just, it really hits home.
Then I'll see you in hell.
It lets you know that he's willing to risk it all, and just that scene where the door closes, it adds so much, with Chewie's agonizing cries showing how much he cares about the character. Now, before it goes down, we get 2 of the rebels discussing that they've had no word, and on the right's John Ratzenberger, who played Cliff in Cheers. Not really much of an Easter egg, but Obi-Wan delivers his message, and I've always thought it was so cool how Han appeared behind him. I don't know if Obi-Wan in the blizzard was what drew him to Luke, or if he just dropped the message because he knew he was coming, but it's such a great transition from one character to the other. I doubt it's because Han sees him, but we try and look at it from all angles, though he probably would have seen the ghost in the Jedi if he could see ghosts. Either way, he also busts out Luke's lightsaber, and as a kid, I always remember playing as him and doing the odd thing with it, because I thought Han at least still could smash about with one if the situation called for it. Now, I always liked the idea that Han saved Luke from getting frozen, but in the end, Luke failed to return the favour. Both are encased in something that keeps them alive, but one goes off to a darker fate, whereas the other doesn't. Han manages to save Luke using the old survival trick of sleeping in an animal's innards, and this was something that they also showed in The Revenant. Now, one touch-up Lucas did was the colour of Han's coat, as this basically became the first blue or gold dress. Back in the day, the toys had a blue coat, whereas some people swore that it was brown in the film. For the special editions, they turned up the blue hue to match the toys, because that's the main thing that people tend to remember. Nice bit of trivia for you there, and the next day we see the Snowspeeders heading out and are introduced to Rogue 2.
Commander Skywalker, do you copy? This is Rogue 2.
This would of course gone to influence the name Rogue Squadron, and also Rogue One, which centered around the Rebels. Little bit of cheeky costume design here, but you can catch bubble wraps on the shoulder straps that he's riding around with. Now, Luke is placed in a Bacta tank, and these have been laced throughout the saga with don't get me started on Book of Boba Fett, mate, because every time something got interesting, he'd just go back to the tank. Now, Gareth Edwards also had one appear in Rogue One, and Obi-Wan later used it to reintroduce Vader with those scenes riffing on his son here. Again, I will be talking about how some of these moments pay off in the other movies down the line, as it's unlikely I'll ever cover them in depth or talk about them on a breakdown. I know it does some of you guys head in when I mention stuff like The Last Jedi, but I'll try and keep it to a minimum as we go through the breakdown. Now Han tells Luke,
"Don't look so bad to me. He looks strong enough to pull the ears off a Gundar."
Which is a giant Rancor-like beast that comes from the planet Vancor. Now obviously you guys know, yeah, just have to put a disclaimer in. This movie was shot in 1980, so some of the elements are a little bit dated. They're a little bit problematic, shall we say, and Leia calls Han a nerf herder at one point, which, look, I apologise if you're watching this, we just have to use the word in context to explain what she meant. Now, a nerf herder was someone who herded nerfs, and this was seen as a lower class profession that didn't require any skills or competence. This became an insult throughout the galaxy, though I've never used that word in my entire life. I've never even thought it, and I've definitely never said it when I've rapped along with a song on the radio. Now, after picking up the probe droid, we also get this line.
Send roads 10 and 11 to Station 38.
Which is a reference to George Lucas's film THX 1138. This was also dropped in A New Hope.
Cell block 1138.
Showing that it's all connected. Now, after destroying the probe, we cut to Star Destroyers in space and literally see how they're overshadowed by Vader's new vessel. This Super Star Destroyer completely engulfs all, and one of its hyperdrive engines recently popped up in Ahsoka. We've actually just launched a new Ahsoka-inspired t-shirt just below on the merch store right under the video, and every sale helps you look slick and helps videos like this get made. Make sure you send us pictures of you rocking it on Twitter as well, and we can drop them in the videos as a big thank you to say, you know what, we appreciate your support. Now, accompanying this is Vader's Imperial March, which was based on the planet's Mars bringer of war. I love the bickering between the officers and Vader just calmly shutting down any of the dissent. Just something so, I don't know, militaristic about the whole thing, and even his spin to catch a guy standing very close behind him, it's just like everyone's fixated on what he says. Now we get a cameo back at Echo Base with concept artist Ralph McQuarrie walking through a scene. In his hand he's holding a sketchbook, and according to the legends, this contains his original drawings. We can also see Han fixing up the Falcon and can catch a periscope droid which appeared in A New Hope. This is actually a final farewell between Luke and Han, and they wouldn't actually see each other again until Return of the Jedi. Back on the ship, we see as Vader force chokes Admiral Ozzel, calling back to him doing it to Krennic in the first movie. I kinda smirked watching this back, seeing Ozzel slowly die while Vader just keeps barking orders, and nobody around Ozzy tries to step in and help him out. Kinda shows how Imperials aren't exactly bothered about labor laws, but we actually get a really subtle detail that builds off this scene. Piet is promoted from captain to admiral, and later on the characters got a slightly extended badge. Now at this point the AT-ATs arrive, with them being designed and filmed in stop motion by Phil Tippett. According to Tippett, he based them off the alien walkers in War of the Worlds, and also on gantry cranes which line ship docks. Studying elephants, they wanted their movement as realistic as possible, and they're some of the most memorable things that we encounter in this film. A little cool thing they do is that when they target the shield generator, we can actually see the blaster bolts way bigger than the standard shots. Now subtly, Lucas lets us know that the rebels are screwed here, as the first thing we see them do is evacuating the planet. The entire speeder scene is simply to buy them time, and rather than being like a heroic battle from the first film, their only interest's escaping. Now I do poop on the special editions a bit, but one thing it allowed them to do in these moments was tidy up the effects. Originally, the mat on the ships and walkers wasn't as developed as it is now, and you could actually see them through the parts of the cockpit. They cleaned this up for the re-releases, with transparency now being completely removed, but if you had the old special edition VHS, then you'll know they discussed it on that. Luckily for you, if you don't have it, I actually dug out the old tape, but a warning, yeah, some of these clips may be in 480p.
A challenge when we did it, because nobody had ever done blue screen matting on a white surface. Usually do it on dark surfaces.
Here we go then. Action!
We used optical technology, of course, to do all that compositing. And a telltale sign that something's been optically composited is a black line around it. And when you have a sequence that takes place in outer space against stars, it's easy to reach a point where those black lines don't show up. But when you have a sequence that takes place against snow in the daylight, every hint of that black matte line becomes very visible. And so the first time through doing the doing the snow battle here 17 years ago, a lot of effort went into finding ways to minimize that black line. One of the ways was to not print all of the elements at their full opacity.
All right, I'm coming in.
Consequently, when you see the snow battle on film, you may notice that there's part of the scenery is visible through the cockpit. And it was a constant trade-off of how transparent can we make the cockpit. At what point is the black line more objectionable than the transparency? And so there was an opportunity to go back into those shots, use the computer technology, and eliminate all the transparency, but also not have any matte lines.
Now, during this attack, we also get our first Wilhelm scream, which is something that appears throughout almost every movie. We also meet Luke's co-pilot Dak, who always felt like he was brought in so they could just kill him for this battle. He's actually named after editor Dwayne Dunham's dog Dak, and this brings a sort of biplane aesthetic to the ships. Dennis Lawson also returns after fan interest due to him being one of the only survivors from the Death Star mission. Now, I'm sure you know, but just in case you don't, Lawson's actually Ewan McGregor's uncle, who of course played Obi-Wan. Now, all the scenes involving explosions with them, such as when Luke throws a thermal detonator under one and the down one blows up, they had to be shot using different techniques. Due to them being miniatures, they had to be filmed on high-speed cameras, which were then slowed down to make the tiny explosions look big. Also, I know there's some back and forth on the pronunciation of whether it's AT-AT or AT-AT, with Lucas saying it's in fact pronounced AT-AT. I don't think they care though, because loads of these names get pronounced differently even from scene to scene. Han gets called Han, I actually call him Han, but I've been purposely calling him Han throughout the video just to avoid comments, and Donald Glover actually made a joke about this during the movie Solo. Billy D. Williams accidentally called him Han and no one corrected it, so Glover did the same thing in Solo, which Han then corrected. They also have a moment where Billy D. Williams calls him Han, and you can tell it throws everyone off in the scene because they all start doing the same thing.
It sounds like Han. Let's do it just to save Han.
Now, the accents in general, they tend to decide how something's said, and it was actually during this movie that Kirshner made sure to make the sides have distinctive ones. In A New Hope, Leia has a more British sounding voice, but Carrie in this movie leans into her actual one. Kirshner made sure to have all the rebels speaking American and all of the Imperials speaking with a British accent. This was done to make the story an analogue to the American Revolution, and even though a lot of the actors in the Hoth scenes were British, they actually ended up redubbing a lot of the actors to keep up this consistency. You can spot this when the guy sees the AT-AT and his mouth doesn't move along with what he's saying.
Echo Station 3TA. Echo Station 3TA.
Echo Station 3TA.
Now, amongst the AT-ATs, we can also spot AT-STs, which, looking back, maybe it should be pronounced AT-AT. Either way, they play a much bigger role in the follow-up film, and Lucas actually filmed more scenes involving them just for this movie. However, he found the AT-ATs were far more menacing, realizing the smaller ones would be better for close quarters combat. After Dak dies, we get a really heroic moment with Luke where he shows he's capable of taking down an AT-AT single-handedly. I'm just going to call them AT-ATs because that's what I feel I should do, and from now on I'm also calling him Han. Don't boo! Don't boo!
Move this man!
Now, using his lightsaber, he busts one up, and it shows how skilled that he's becoming as a fighter. We also get a moment where a walker shoots down a speeder, and I just love the stop motion here where it tilts and takes it out. Looks really cool, and it also changes the tone of the scene to give the Imperials the upper hand. The shield generator's destroyed, and we then cut back to the base where we see Han and Co desperately racing to the Falcon. The snowtroopers storm in, and the uniforms were actually based around German troopers who were sent to the front lines to fight the war with Russia. Might be a reach, but I always felt they looked like KKK cloaks as well, with the point being removed from the top of their heads. Either way, Han busts out one of the Falcon's surprises with a gun dropping down from underneath the ship. This was later riffed on in The Force Awakens, with us getting a similar one dropping out of Poe's X-Wing. The Falcon escaping also transitions perfectly into Luke seeing it take off, and yet just some really tight storytelling taking us from one character to the next. On Luke's X-Wing, we can also catch the marking ZZ, which in the universe is Arabesh for RR. This could be related to the Rebels, but so far no one's found out what it actually means, but if you know, then drop it below. Now the Falcon flies into space, which is where we see it's pursued by a bunch of TIE fighters. Throughout the film, 3PO's been constantly trying to tell Han the hyperdrive's not working, which means they have to fly directly into an asteroid field. Now the failed jump comes with a stock sound effect of a plane starting up, to which I'm sure they reused in Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Watch this.
Get lots of slapstick comedy with the tools smacking off Han's head, which lets us know they're heading towards the asteroid. Really love how C-3PO gives the odds for survival as well, and after doing it earlier, this kinda becomes his catchphrase. Whenever I think of him, he's giving the odds, and yeah, I love the banter and dialogue between the whole crew here. Now the asteroid field pushed the creative team to the limit, and they had to build a new version of the Falcon that could pull off these complex twists and turns. We watch as these maneuvers cause the Star Destroyers to almost crash into each other, and these almost appear like their teeth. Kind of feel like this foreshadows the space slug escape later on, and how its jaws almost close around the ship. The asteroids themselves apparently had some that were made out of potatoes, and even one of the VFX artist's shoes are in there. Now we even get a moment where a TIE fighter flies directly into an asteroid, and you can catch the pilot getting flung out into space. To me, this is also where Williams' score really sings, and it's probably one of my favourite pieces in this entire franchise. Now back on the Star Destroyer, we see Vader's meditation chamber and get a brief glimpse at the back of his head. Apparently the sound effects for this use is an entire block of Alcatraz doors slamming shut, and seeing Vader like this is another hint to the subtext. He and Luke are of course related, and they're both shown to be scarred and inside of a white chamber. The atmosphere in here is altered, which is why Vader can breathe without his helmet. However, he does have a small mask that we see being pulled up as we get the shot of his head. Such a funny detail happens here when we cut to an establishing shot of the asteroid field and can see a Star Destroyer being hit directly with one. We then jump to Vader talking to holograms of his admirals and can catch the guy to the left reacting to the impact before the transmission cuts off. Just a nice little bit of dark humour, and it also shows how little Vader really gives a fuck about his underlings. Now Vader ends up moving out of the asteroid field to speak with the Emperor, which is when we get one of the big special edition changes. Originally the Emperor was played by Marjorie Eaton, with them superimposing chimpanzee eyes over her face. This was later referenced in Rise of Skywalker when we had a chimpanzee fixing Kylo's helmet with a visor over its eyes. Clive Revill provided the voice, with the scene and dialogue later being updated to have Ian McDermott. Now there are some line changes here, so it expands more on Luke, and also him being the offspring of Anakin Skywalker.
We have a new enemy, Luke Skywalker.
We have a new enemy, the young rebel who destroyed the Death Star. I have no doubt this boy is the offspring of Anakin Skywalker.
Now originally, Anakin wasn't mentioned in name until Return of the Jedi, with Obi-Wan's Force Ghost saying it for the first time. Really McClunky you could say, and yeah, I kinda prefer the way that they had it originally. Anyway, on Dagobah, R2 gets swallowed by a swamp creature which in the expanded lore is known as a Hagobad. This is actually an anagram of Dagobah, and something else got altered in these scenes too. If you saw this movie in the theaters, then you might remember Luke dropping a line about R2 not tasting very good.
You're lucky you don't taste very good. You were lucky to get out of there.
Now why this was changed is because when the movie was originally sent out, different prints had slightly different sound mixes. When they made the special editions, they ended up picking the one with the final line, though personally I still prefer the original. Now Luke says that he feels there's something familiar about this place, and its strong connection to the Force likely gives his notion. He can also sense that they're being watched, showing how his connection to it has been improved. Luke then runs into Yoda, and Lucas has kept a lot of his species' backstory a mystery. I love how Yoda just plays about with him, and this is all done as a test to see if Luke has any patience. Luke fails by getting angry and frustrated, and this is when he reveals that he can't teach him.
I cannot teach him. The boy has no patience.
Yoda really embodies the teachings of the Jedi, which themselves were based around the Eastern ideologies of self-defense. Martial arts like karate and judo, the key word with them is defense, because you're not meant to go on the attack and use them to bully people. This is why when we see Yoda's training, it mainly involves running and meditation, rather than going on the offensive and practicing sparring. Even the little floating droid that Luke practiced with in A New Hope, that was all about blocking, and it's rare that the Jedi are supposed to go on the attack. Now when we first cut to Yoda in his backpack, we can also see a winged creature known as a Dagbat. Luke questions whether the dark side is stronger because from what he's seen, evil makes things easier. However, like Yoda says, it's more difficult to master your feelings, and having power over this is where the true control lies. Yoda even says if Luke picks up his lightsaber in anger that it will drastically change the course of his entire life. That's definitely the case, and it actually reflects what happens when Luke goes into the cave. Luke was told to not take weapons with him, but doing this showed why he got what he got. As Yoda says,
"Only what you take with you."
Now Luke went looking for a fight, and thus he found one. This somewhat foreshadows the ending, as he purposely goes looking for a battle with Vader, and in the end that's what he finds. The cave shows you your darkest thoughts, and that explains why Luke sees a vision of himself in the mask. Now they actually tried to use a prosthetic head for this, but it looked too unrealistic when it was revealed. Thus Hamill had to stick his head out the ground and then sit with a mask covering his face. However, this proved to be really difficult, as he wasn't allowed to blink, even with all that smoke blowing in his face. And there's actually a hint that this Vader is fake, and we can hear that his breathing is slightly different. His lightsaber is also coloured to be more orange looking, and this gives off the effect that it's more of a vision than reality. They purposely made this vision die in a similar way to Obi-Wan, which makes it seem like Luke's becoming more like his dad. Now Luke's face inside Vader's helmet also highlights the connection between him and his dad, and it helps set up the theme of the next two movies, which is about the father and son relationship. Vader of course wants to make his son come over to the dark side, and the word Vader actually means father in Dutch, though it is pronounced differently. I also love how as Vader walks out the cave, we can see as the environment creates these slanted archways. Later on, when Luke fights him down the corridor in Bespin, we can also see the archways return to build off this moment. Now the following scene is Luke trying to lift the X-Wing out the bog, and Frank Oz does so much with the puppet here. Just the look of shock really carries across, and it's moments like this that embody the true power of a Jedi. I keep telling my wife that size matters not, and we see that in the case of Yoda lifting the ship. And the timeline of this is a bit all over the place, as the Falcon manages to get to Bespin without the use of a hyperdrive. People obviously wonder how long of a trip in space that is, but Lucasfilm have actually never nailed down how long it took. Alongside the training, it's thought to be about 3 days, so like I said, it's never been confirmed. Now Luke clearly hates all of his training, and yeah, maybe he should have taken the online course instead of going to the planet. He ignores both the warnings of Obi-Wan and Yoda, and decides to leave, which is when we get this clue about Leia.
That boy is our last hope.
No, there is another.
Well, they actually somewhat reveal who this is subtly, as the next character we see after this line is actually Leia. They do some overly long shots of the X-Wing going to space, followed by some Cloud City moments, but the next time that we see someone, it is her in the window. Now Lucas put this line in not only to allude to this, but he also wanted the audience to feel like Luke could actually die. Doing this might make us think they were going to replace him, which is a nice little way to raise tensions for the fight. Now in these establishing shots, in this special edition at least, we see a Tabana gas platform which mine it from the planet below. In Rogue Squadron they had a mission where you had to attack Imperial containers on these, and the gas in general plays into the fight at the end. The carbonite chamber is full of it, and this is actually what Luke sprays in Vader's face during their duel. Now Vader ends up calling in lots of bounty hunters, including characters like Bosk. His costume was actually grabbed from the archives of Doctor Who, with them then adding the lizard mask to top off the look. Fett, IG-88, and Dengar are also there as well, with the latter having a rivalry with Solo in the expanded lore. Now Fett's voice was redubbed after Attack of the Clones to make it so that he sounded more like Temuera Morrison. Looking back, I actually prefer the original. I don't know, watching it with Morrison, it does kind of take me out of it, even though I like the actor.
You may take Captain Solo to Jabba the Hutt after I have Skywalker.
He's no good to me dead.
He's no good to me dead.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
What if he doesn't survive? He's worth a lot to me.
Across space, we join the Millennium Falcon hiding out on a slug. Lots of clear allusions to Pinocchio in this, with the creature even appearing whale-like when we see it later on. 3PO talks to the Falcon, and in this movie you really get the feeling that it's its own character. It breaks down, chugs along, talks to the droid, and takes on a bit of a life of its own.
Sir,
I don't know where your ship learned to communicate, but it has the most peculiar dialect.
Now, this dialogue with the ship would later get expanded on in Solo, with L337 getting uploaded into it. Han and Leia have their first kiss to a bit of John Williams, which is then interrupted by C-3PO. Now on the outside of the asteroid, we watch as bombers sweep the area, which was a new TIE design created for this film. This was actually based on the World War II German Voss BV-141 reconnaissance bomber, which had a dual fuselage to it that these also carry. Now this is of course coming from a World War II aesthetic, and the Stormtrooper blasters themselves are based on a Sterling L2A3MK. Love this line by Han as well.
Sir, if I may venture an opinion.
I'm not really interested in your opinion, 3PO.
And after fighting Minox on the ship, Han realizes they're inside the belly of the beast and they make a dash for it. The noise of Minox was actually created by playing a horse grunt and then reversing it, which you can kinda hear.
Watch out!
These masks that they're wearing would later appear in the saga, with Rey and Finn using them in Force Awakens. I'm gonna get so much shit for mentioning the sequels, but that's where they pop up again. Anyway, after they escape, we see the Falcon being chased by destroyers, and they pull off a desperate maneuver to get out of the situation. Hiding on the back of a Star Destroyer, this was a technique Lucas reused for Obi-Wan in the prequel trilogy. Retroactively, I think this was dropped into Attack of the Clones to show why Boba was able to suss out the Falcon doing the same tactic down the line. Slave One appears in both of these films, with its colour scheme reflecting the armour of its owner in both instances. Now the crew fly out to Bespin after Han suggests it, with Chewbacca hinting at the history between him and Lando. This is expanded upon more in Solo, with us seeing how Han actually won the Falcon.
Well, that was a long time ago. I'm sure he's forgotten about that.
As we know, the character cheated, but he used Lando's tactics, so fair is fair. Now they're also escorted in by cloud cars, which are atmospheric cars produced by Bespin Motors. Reddit user Xenomorphosaurus theorized that the Falcon was fired upon at first because Lando was actually trying to warn them off from it. The Empire would of course want them to land, so this aggressive tactic might be the only thing Lando could do. Now again, it's a theory there, but yeah, let me know below exactly what you think. Now Cloud City actually builds off the back of a concept from the first film, with it originally being conceived as a prison above Alderaan. This is where Obi-Wan and Vader's duel was going to go down, but it was just all pushed into the Death Star for some economic storytelling. Now lots of this approach was redone for the special editions, with them also changing out the backgrounds so it showed more of the city. Greeted by Lando, I feel like this was the role that got Billy D that Colt 45 career. Here we also meet a Zayd Lobot who's got cybernetic parts placed over his head. In the movie this covers his entire ears, and ironically the actor John Hollis did something similar in the past. Hollis also played a Clytus Observer in Flash Gordon, but in that he had a cybernetic device over his eyes. The banter between the pair instantly comes through, and we get a sort of love triangle with Lando in the mix. Now in the scene where Lando takes Leia's hand, Han grabs it off him, and we get a little smile from Carrie Fisher. This moment of Han grabbing her was apparently improvised in the moment, which caught her off guard and caused her to break character. Not really breaking, but you know what I mean, and the smile here seems genuine instead of being acted. Given a lush white penthouse, it's clear Lando's trying to win them around with comfort so that they stay longer for the Empire to put things in place. He even says to Leia,
"Look absolutely beautiful. You truly belong here with us among the clouds."
Thank you.
Hinting at the part of the deal of how they now have to remain prisoner there. Taking a dinner, they're immediately greeted by Vader, and I absolutely love the way the scene plays out. It shows just how quick to draw that Han is, whilst also cementing Vader's true strength. Han vs Vader is a matchup that you'd never really think to see, and even watching it here, you can instantly see why. Even though he's one of the best characters in the saga, he's got no chance, and Vader just blocks his blaster bolts by lifting his hand.
He's made you look a right knob.
I've always kind of taken this as being akin to bullets bouncing off Superman, and it sets up the idea that Luke doesn't stand a chance. Now from this point, Han's interrogated or tortured due to them not really asking any questions.
They never even asked me any questions.
This is purely because Vader wanted to lure out Luke, and he knew doing this would give him visions of his friends suffering. There'd be absolutely no point in asking him anything, which is why he just tortures him instead of standing there chit-chatting. Now from here he's taken to be frozen, which is when Princess Leia says, "I love you." You probably already know this because you're very far deep into a Star Wars video, but just in case you don't, here's what happened with Han's reply.
There was a moment in it when Han Solo was about to be
cast into a object later to be purchased by Kurtzman and Hortzy. They made into, frozen into carbonite. And finally, the princess reveals her great love for him, and her line is, "I love you." And George had artfully contrived for Han Solo to say, "I love you too."
Right. No, not for you.
Well, I thought it was a lost opportunity.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, this character had never behaved so unabashedly emotional and conventional before, and I thought, are we pissing away this great opportunity for the character? You want your badasses to be a badass to the end. You want them to go down the way they lived. So I said, I mean, what's the last thing a woman wants to hear when she says, "I love you"? She says, "I love you," and I say, "I know."
Right.
And so we shot.
You shot one like that, right?
Well, we shot one, just for protection, where I spoke the line as written. And George, I think that this is fair enough to say, he went apeshit. He thought it was horrible and that it would get a bad laugh. So I was obliged to sit next to him when he tested it for the first screening. There was a laugh, but it was a laugh of recognition.
Kind of ties back to him teasing her before.
Come on! You want me to stay because of the way you feel about me?
And something about the way he's dumped down, almost like a living death, where he's become part of the coffin, it just sticks in your mind as a big point in this movie. Just the drool and the look of pain on his face frozen is something that's always been part of my memory, and every time I think back to this movie, this is one of the first things that pops up. It's almost like a frozen agony, with this being such an impactful way to close out his arc in the film. This would later be riffed upon in Solo: A Star Wars Story, when the character falls in some mud and poses in a similar position. You also see a really subtle change in Lando here, as he grabs his neck after Vader tells him he's altered the deal. Typically people do this when they feel vulnerable, and it might show that the constant changes have now gone too far. Vader has also choked out multiple people in this movie too, and it could be symbolically building off that to show how close he is to getting it done to him. Now, this scene is also the only moment in the original trilogy where Vader and 3PO are on screen together. Watching the prequels and knowing what we know, I thought he would have been like, "Oh shit, is that 3PO? That's my boy!" After this moment, Luke sneaks through the location, which is where he sees Han's body being escorted through. As he draws his blaster, we see Fett turn his head, and this is because he actually hears the gun getting pulled out. This is why he goes back and starts shooting, and it's such a cool detail to show how aware he is. Funnily enough, Luke pulls his blaster out throughout the movie at several points, but he never actually fires it throughout the entire film. Now, the battle between Luke and Vader is shot brilliantly, with us getting the two different sides almost in every aspect. Blue and red are the two key colours here, with both blades representing dark and light. This is carried across to the environment too, with the blue background clashing with the reddish glow of the stairs. The reddish glow can also be seen in Vader's Super Star Destroyer, with the engines of it appearing the same colour at roughly the 22-minute mark. Vader fights with just one hand, exuding confidence, and it's clear that he's just toying with his new Padawan. However, after Luke tricks him, he goes back to using two, showing that he slowly realizes he needs to take the fight more seriously. The longer it goes on, the tougher it gets, with Vader even getting to the point that he just starts throwing stuff at him. He also disarms him, which causes Luke to drop his blade, and this disarming move's a trick that he does later on. However, Luke refuses to let go of it, and the second time Vader disarms him by literally disarming him. Now, after Luke falls down the stairs, we get a little moment where we can actually see him looking above Vader's head. It's a very subtle glance, but it telegraphs his next move, which is to jump above him after he gets dropped in the pit. Now, the shot of Luke pulling the lightsaber to his hand was actually achieved by Hamill just throwing it and then reversing the footage. Bit of a gaff in the carbonite chamber, but when it goes into his hand, if you slow it down yet, you can see it lighting before he actually grabs it. Nitpick, it's a nitpick, and Vader also taunts Luke about his training with Obi-Wan.
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
This is because he's unaware that Yoda was doing it, and he still thinks it's his previous master who was teaching him. Now later on, the pair get separated, and Vader actually hides from Luke down one of the corridors. Upon appearing, his breathing speeds up, and this is because the character has been holding his breath to not give away where he is. These corridors would again appear in Rey's vision in The Force Awakens just before she discovered Luke's lightsaber, which gets lost shortly after this scene. Sending Luke out the window, we can see how far this fall was, as you can catch it in the top left when we cut to the establishing shot. When he's hanging, you can also see his lightsaber just sitting on the walkway, explaining how he managed to get it back after this fall. Now while this is going on, Lando ends up helping the rebels escape, and we watch as he races after the Falcon with them. At the end, we see him wearing Han's clothes, and for years I was like, whoa, that's a bit fucking cold, mate. Now, but what the theory is that Lando left his home with just the clothes on his back, so he would have had to fish around in Han's stuff in order to get a change of them. Not like Han needed them, and I actually heard they smell better on the inside. Now, just before rushing through the corridors, R2 gets electrocuted on a power socket, and this moment was something that appeared in the original novelization for A New Hope. In the end, Lucas didn't end up using it, but he brought it across for this film after thinking it was a funny gag. Racing through the corridors, Lando runs past the character Wilro Hood, and we can see that he's carrying a container. It turns out, right, this is actually an ice cream maker, but it's something that's been actively now brought into the franchise as being a container that holds stuff. Popped up in Battlefront where you could get rewards from it, and Decline also had one in The Mandalorian. Now cutting back to the fight, Luke actually gets first blood, and he manages to cut Vader's shoulder, which is when he realizes that he has to wrap things up. Throughout the battle, he's just been toying with his son, but he finally realizes the kid could beat him and decides to end it there. Cutting off his hand, we then get the big talking point of this movie, with the twist being revealed that Vader's Luke's father.
Spoiler alert.
Now, this was kept completely under wraps from everyone on set, except for Mark Hamill, who was actually told the reveal just moments before shooting. The line used on set was, "No, Obi-Wan killed your father," with it then being dubbed over by James Earl Jones. David Prowse, he was a bit annoyed he got kept in the dark because he said he'd have played it differently to make the body language more impactful. Hamill actually said that when he and Ford first watched the movie that he leaned over and said, "Hey kid, you never fucking told me that." Now James Earl Jones was so sure that Vader was lying that he actually thought it was untrue until he read the sequel script. I love how devastating this moment is even now, and everything about it is carried across perfectly. Even just the way the Imperial March changes to give it this more impactful feel, we slowly start to see as Luke realizes it's true.
No, I am your father.
Now this lines became discussed in a lot of collective false memory syndrome because most people swear it's Luke, I am your father. Even James Earl Jones said it, but yeah, no mention of Luke in the entire thing. Now another reason this whole thing's so painful to Luke is because he realizes that Obi-Wan has lied to him. This was someone he looked up to and trusted, and now he really doesn't know what he should believe. Luke says,
"See you, chump,"
and throws himself into the chasm, showing that he'd rather face death than join with his dad. However, as he falls down, he goes into a chute, which could have something extra going on with it. Now this is probably down to the Force, but this viewing I actually had a different theory. What if, right, Vader was someone who was actually guiding him, and this is because he wanted to save his son. They actually added in a scream for the special editions, but I think this has been removed in the latest update. Also, lots of extra audio in this movie is just explaining certain things, because Lucas thought people were too stupid to get it, so they just spell it out in the special editions.
Oh, this is suicide. Oh, this is suicide. There's nowhere to go.
Either way, he reaches out to Leia, and for the special edition, they added in an extra hatch on the Falcon to block out the white background. Now, from this point, we get what, in my personal opinion, is the worst change in the special editions. Not kidding you. But now Vader, in the original cut, he was furious, and this was so well reflected in James's slightly toned back, but still angry delivery.
Bring my shuttle.
It's just so badass.
Bring my shuttle.
But then, because Lucas was worried that audiences wouldn't understand that his shuttle and Star Destroyer were two different things, they changed it to this.
Alert my Star Destroyer to prepare for my arrival.
Lucas, yeah, he felt he really had to underline it, and then we got added in shuttle shots where he flies up to the ship and then shots of him stepping off it. These were actually unused ones from Return of the Jedi, which were then used to help pad out the journey. Now reaching out to Leia, I love this shot of the Falcon turning around on the clouds, and the TIE Fighter chase turns what could have been a dull rescue scene into a really exciting one. The sun coming up behind the planet and the hyperdrive being broken, it all just adds so much to it, and R2 saves the day, allowing them to jump. From here we get a shot from behind Vader's head, which echoes the way that he was introduced in the movie. Both scenes use the same framing, and it brings it full circle from that beginning. Guy's too lost in thought about his son to even kill Piet, even though he promised Vader they deactivated the hyperdrive.
Did your men deactivate the hyperdrive on the Millennium Falcon?
Yes, my lord.
Good.
I love how after they jump, he just turns around and walks away, and everyone's just kind of staring like, is he going to kick off? Honestly, there aren't really that many jokes in the film, but there's a lot of little humorous bits like this where I just laugh because everyone's so scared shitless of Vader. Kind of reminds me of when I drop an 11,000 word script on the editors and I'm like, you better fucking get this done in an hour's time, mate, or you're fucking dead. And at this point, we cut to the medical frigate with Luke getting a replacement hand put in place. Works too well, and he even feels pain through it, but it carries a special meaning with it as well. Vader is more man than machine, and Luke is slowly starting to come closer to his father through the replacement of his limb. Though it is a little touch, it's him slowly stepping forwards towards the vision that he had in the cave. From here we cut to Luke and Leia looking out over the galaxy, and a feeling that they have a long road ahead of them to go and get Han. Now this does sort of have a bittersweet feeling to it, and it's not as dour as it originally was. Hamill actually said they shot this moment 4 months after principal photography wrap because they wanted to add a slightly more hopeful ending to the movie. Now this would later go on to get echoed in Attack of the Clones, where we close out with Anakin and Padme. Anakin has a mechanical hand, and both he and Padme look out over the lake in a similar position to Luke and Leia. Either way, it closes out the movie, ending what's an incredible film.
Impressive. Most impressive.
It's hard to overstate how much of a hit it was, and even back in 1980, it grossed about $400 million at the box office. Adjusted for inflation, this is the equivalent to about $1.9 billion, which would make it one of the most successful movies of all time. Unfortunately, Lucas still had a bit of a rough time behind the scenes, and when making the film, there were constant spiraling costs. The bank threatened to pull the loan we talked about before, and Lucas was then left in a position where he had to again approach 20th Century Fox. They agreed to secure the loan, but wanted a bigger cut, and Lucas managed to do it without losing the sequel and merchandising rights. However, it still stuck as a sore point for him, and because of this, he took Raiders over to Paramount. This easily ended up with 20th Century possibly losing out on more in the long run, and yeah, whether it was a good deal for them or not remains to be seen. Now Lucas still, well, they're all owned by Disney now anyway. Now Lucas still benefited off this film massively though, and it's difficult to deny how much it changed cinema. Even as a kid, I remember this being a movie that really changed my perspective on stuff, because to me, yeah, the good guys, they were always meant to win. This flipped the script and dealt a devastating blow that a lot of franchises still try to mimic today. Still though, I feel the original's the best, and this is a masterpiece in movie making from start to finish. This is a film that took Star Wars from being a franchise with a fun film into a behemoth that altered how we look at movies. Throughout this video, we're going to be going through it scene by scene to talk about all the things you missed, as well as those well-loved special edition changes. Coming off the back of two of the biggest blockbusters of all time, George Lucas had the galaxy in the palm of his hands, but he was faced with the almost impossible task of sticking the landing for a film series that had completely changed cinema. I know looking back, people tend to complain about the Ewoks and how Luke's Jabba's plan makes no sense, but when I watched this as a kid, I never had any problems with it. I guess I've been lucky in that, because of my love for it, none of the criticisms ever bothered me, and it's still a movie that I absolutely adore. I think the biggest problem with the movie is that it unfortunately had the difficult task of following A New Hope and Empire, which to me are still some of the best films ever made. Now Empire was of course a massive success, and at that point it was one of the highest grossing films of all time.
Impressive. Most impressive.
A sequel was quickly put into production, with Lucas then financing the entire thing. Continuing to remain as a producer, Lucas began searching for directors, with him initially approaching longtime friend Steven Spielberg. However, due to issues with the Directors Guild, Lucas unfortunately had his hands tied.
The filmmaker found himself unexpectedly mired in Hollywood politics. To preserve the dramatic opening sequences of his films, Lucas wanted the screen credits to come at the end of the movies. it was a highly unusual choice. And for the first Star Wars, the Writers Guild and Directors Guild had allowed it. But when Lucas did the same for the sequel, they fined him over $250,000 and even attempted to pull Empire from theaters. Next, the DGA went after Irvin Kershner. To protect his director, Lucas paid all the fines to the guilds, but the situation left him feeling frustrated and persecuted.
Lucas was so upset that he dropped out of the Directors Guild, the Writers Guild, and the Motion Picture Association.
Thus, Spielberg was unable to do it, and Lucas turned back to David Lynch again. He apparently approached him for Empire, but he still felt his style was too distant from what Lucas wanted, and David Cronenberg also declined the job. Eventually settling on Richard Marquand, it's actually thought that Lucas somewhat ghost-directed the film due to Marquand's inexperience with special effects. At one point, Richard joked it was like trying to direct King Lear with Shakespeare in the next room, as Lucas was on set for a large part of the production. Now, during Empire, he was in the process of setting up ILM and a number of different production studios, so he wasn't physically able to be on set as much. However, Mann now had way more free time, and this was the case in the writing too. Working once more with Lawrence Kasdan, the screenplay was created with the original title being Return of the Jedi before it was then switched to Revenge.
George came to me and he said, the title of episode 6 is Return of the Jedi. And I said, I think it's a weak title. And he came back 1 or 2 days later and he says, we're calling it Revenge of the Jedi.
However, this idea of revenge, it never sat right with Lucas. He felt like revenge was against the Jedi way, and thus it went back to the original before the film hit cinemas. And they also had a bit of an issue with Harrison Ford that was a carryover from Empire. Though Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher signed on for the sequels, they never actually got Ford to agree to them. Bringing him back for Empire had been a bit of a negotiation, and he actually wanted Han to get killed off in the carbonite scene. His status as an actor had also risen with Indiana Jones, and Lucas even went into crafting the screenplay with the idea that there was no way he was going to come back. However, Howard Kazanjian got lucky when dealing with his agent Phil Gersh, who was on vacation at the time of the negotiations. When Howard called up the agency, it was luckily his son who answered, and together the pair then negotiated the deal. So David, his son, he saved Star Wars and he's a bloody top bloke. Now, Phil wasn't too happy when he got back, and he thought they'd taken advantage of his son, but Solo was on lock, and he was then added to the script. Anyway, both Ford and Kasdan thought that Solo should be killed early on in the movie, and this would put some stakes into the rest of the film.
I thought Han Solo should die. I thought he ought to sacrifice himself for the other two characters.
I also felt someone had to go. I felt someone had to die.
I said, he's got no mama, he's got no papa, he's got no future. He has no story responsibilities at this point. So let's allow him to commit self-sacrifice.
This would happen during a raid on Endor, and then Luke would end up like a lone gunslinger and the solo hero. However, Lucas shut down the idea, and it has been thought this was down to how many Han Solo toys they'd managed to sell over the last couple of years. Ford said Lucas didn't see a future in dead Han toys, and the Solo stayed alive until the end of the film. Now, the Ewoks were also originally Wookiees, but I'm guessing those toy sales made Lucas change his mind to make something cuter. Yoda was also someone who was completely absent from the film, but director Richard Marquand felt like they needed to bring things full circle from the prior movie. Lucas also saw this as an opportunity to confirm Vader was indeed Luke's father, as many suspected the twist at the end of Empire was actually a lie. This included James Earl Jones, who didn't believe they were related until he sat down and read the script for Return. Now, production began at Elstree Studios, with the movie occupying 9 sets. With a budget of $32.5 million, Lucas actually saved roughly $18 million by using his own company ILM to carry out the special effects. Given the working title Blue Harvest will not do a Weekly Planet, and this was due to the production feeling like they were being ripped off. Because of the success of the prior movies, it was assumed that Lucasfilm had enough money to build an actual Death Star, and thus they constantly got overcharged when they went out to buy things for the film. People felt like they could invoice more because the company could afford it, and thus they created the working title to keep it out the public eye. Blue Harvest filmed from January to May 1982, being a shoot that was 6 years shorter than Empire. This allowed ILM to get way more time to work on the effects, including a massive space battle at the end, which would culminate on a richly detailed set of tunnels in the second Death Star. Now, the movie also ended up leading to the creation of THX due to some test screenings failing to output several of the sound effects and themes in the movie. Thus, Lucas did the old, if you want to do something, you've got to do it yourself, and he implemented THX, which became a staple in the industry. All in all, the entire saga not only changed a lot of things for Lucas, but it also changed a lot of things for cinema in general. Now, the movie begins with the usual text crawl, but there's a slight difference to what's come before and what followed. The crawl ends with 3 ellipses, whereas in every other title crawl it ends with 4. This was actually put in place because Lucas wanted to leave us with the idea there'd be no other films after this, though he did have ideas of doing 3 trilogies at the time. Lucas also said he was inspired by Lord of the Rings and its 3rd iteration, Return of the King, which he felt was a fitting way to close things out. Now, like a lot of Star Wars titles, there's a layered meaning to this one, with the titular Jedi more likely being a reference to Anakin rather than being Luke. Luke never really went away, and thus the returning Jedi here makes more sense when you think of it as being Anakin. Now, you can of course apply to Luke as well, and the first sentence of the crawl talks about how Luke returned to his home planet. The idea of returning is also a staple of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, which we've talked about in these breakdowns before. Luke went through all the steps beat by beat in the trilogy, with the final stage being the return. We've also seen this reflected in his colour scheme throughout, with his clothing going from white to black across the 3 films. In A New Hope, he of course wore white, which changed to grey when he got to Empire. Come Return, he's dressed in all black, and fans at the time thought this might show he'd actually turned to the dark side. When the original screenwriting process for the movie began, they did toy with the idea of making him turn evil, and we'd then wonder if he turned back again, which ties into the idea of the return. Elements of this are still apparent in the film, with Luke arriving in a dark silhouette akin to Vader showing up on the Tantive 4 in A New Hope. However, the flap on the front of the uniform eventually folds down, symbolically showing a lighter side within him. Now, speaking of A New Hope, before Force Awakens basically became a remake of it, this movie actually redid a lot of the elements of the film. For example, we start on Tatooine and have another Death Star, with the Emperor sort of being a switch out of Tarkin. Even the opening shots almost look exactly the same, and we have a Star Destroyer coming into view from the exact same angle. Below it is a planet, and off in the distance we can see the Death Star, which has replaced the original moon shot. Again, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme, and we see Vader arriving on the second Death Star. Smoke comes down off the ramp, and it's very similar to the cloud that also surrounded him when he stepped through the door in A New Hope. Now, these shots were later riffed on in Ahsoka when Baylan and Shin Hati arrived on the New Republic cruiser. There's lots of things that Ahsoka actually takes from this film, which I will talk about as well because it's still fresh in my mind. Now, on the shuttle, we also see the language Arabesh, which was created by Lucas after replacing the original English words in A New Hope. Also, as the shuttle comes in, I've just noticed for the first time you can see a TIE bomber parked up in the bottom of the hangar, which we get a clearer view of in the next shot. Now on Tatooine, we see C-3PO and R2 arriving at Jabba's palace, which echoes their journey arriving on the planet in A New Hope. Learning that Lando and Chewbacca never return from here, this sort of foreshadows what the next parts of the plan are. Chatting with a security guard that speaks Huttese, we also get a vastly expanded front door for the special editions. Side by side we can see how they stretched it out, and this was going to give the appearance that it was way more expensive. However, yeah, nitpick, when they get inside we can see it's a lot smaller, so I never really got the point of why they did this in the first place, and that's mainly with a lot of the special edition changes in general. Anyway, we arrive to see Jabba getting fanned by a Jawa and slobbing out dining on frogs.
George said, I need something that's, alien and grotesque, that's like Sydney Greenstreet. Oh, okay. When I had kind of gotten this idea down to this big slug-like thing that is just this big pulsating mass of flesh. At one point, I had a fez on one of the characters, like Sydney Greenstreet. And then Stuart Freeborn in England, his job was to fabricate the thing, and that was operated with one puppeteer for each arm, 2 puppeteers for the arms, another guy doing the head, another guy, radio control guy, doing the eyes. There's like a couple little people in it, pulling things to make the tail move around. It was quite a thing.
Jabba was later added into the special editions of A New Hope, with Lucas originally planning to include him. He had to cut these scenes because of time and money, which was rectified when they had the resources to finally put him in. He's joined by Bib Fortuna, and this is a character that would later go on to take over the throne. Sat by Jabba is also the quacking monkey lizard Salacious Crumb, who Lucas wanted to be sort of the equivalent of a laughing court jester. 3PO and R2 have come to deliver a message from Luke, which I always loved growing up as a kid. It's something that these days we see Denzel doing all the time in the Equalizer movies, and I love how he's basically just saying, we don't have to play f*** around and find out, just give me Han back and you can crawl away from this. It's so badass, but we watch as he rejects this, and the droids are taken to the cells that lie beneath the palace. We see a gonk droid being tortured and also catch a white droid against the back wall, which 3PO bangs into. Now, this was actually a reused prop from the Sandcrawler in A New Hope, with it being in the corner when 3PO and R2 talk. Now we see Jabba dancing away to the Max Rebo band, who ended up returning in the Book of Boba Fett. The musical number here was originally quite scaled back, with the puppet of Snice Noodles not really operating that well. In these shots though, you can catch Lando before they updated the performance for the special editions. This disguise was later brought into Solo, with Woody Harrelson's character Beckett wearing it and leaving it on the Falcon for Lando to then find and use. Also, apologies, I know I'm going to keep referencing movies that come down the line, but I feel like if I don't point them out, then I'm personally going to go insane, being like, I should have just mentioned it, I shouldn't have been scared. Either way, Joe Yauza, I'm sorry guys, I know you hate them. Either way, Joe Yauza was added into these as well, with his vocal performance being based on Joe Cocker. Written by John Williams' son Joseph Williams, he was also a lead member in the band Toto. Now the song's titled Lapti Nek, which translates into Huttese to mean work it out. You can also catch a floating mic flying around the backup singers, and I have to admit, this song, it always makes me tap my feet.
Move this man!
Now, the dancer Ula is dropped into the Rancor pit, with her backstory being pretty dark. Ula was part of the Twi'lek clan on Ryloth before she was basically kidnapped and trafficked by Bib Fortuna. Jabba demonstrates his callous disregard for life with Ula, and at this point, Plan B's put in place. We hear a gunshot and then catch a Rodian spinning round, who ends up standing behind C-3PO as he asks this.
What did I say?
This guy was actually wearing the same vest that Leia had on during the start of Empire Strikes Back, which I kind of feel like is the people on the set giving us a clue that this is actually her. It might be a reach, but yeah, she arrives disguised as the bounty hunter Bouche, and in a bit of behind the scenes info, the numbers 1138 are etched into her helmet, which you can see in the photographs of it. This is a nod to Lucas's film THX 1138, and this number's appeared in all the trilogy movies so far.
Cell block 1138.
Send roads 10 and 11 to station 38.
Now, upon whipping out a thermal detonator, we watch as Boba Fett draws his gun, and they actually had to flip this shot so it looked like he was aiming in the right place. The antenna on the head's normally on the other side, but they found it didn't match up with the way he walked off, so they ended up spinning it around. Now, after a shot of the Wart and binary sunsets, we see Leia approaching the carbonite case as Jabba's crew seemingly sleeps. In the top left, we can see a Tauntaun head hanging up, which of course would be a rare item on a desert planet. I love how in the curtains drawn you can also see a Gran with their hand over 3PO's mouth, and this is so that he doesn't shout and try and warn his friends. Leia is grabbed and she ends up wearing a metallic bikini that fueled a lot of teenage fantasies for most of people my age. Most of the life this stuck with you. And it's meant to echo Flash Gordon once more, with Jabba later saying she'd come to appreciate him, which was supposed to reference Ming the Merciless forcing Dale Arden to marry him. As for her bikini, there were actually two versions of this made, with the second being rubber so that Carrie could move about easier. This is what they whip out during most of the action scenes, and it was due to how uncomfortable that the metallic one was. Luke arrives at this point and we get further teasers that he might be turning evil due to him force choking the guards, which is a signature Vader move. Using the Jedi mind trick, he gets Bib to take him directly to Jabba, but we actually see through Jabba that those who are mentally strong don't fall fully to it. You will like the like button, and he's dropped into the pit where he comes face to face with the Rancor, who he defeats by throwing a skull at a door switch. I always thought this was a rock, but nope, slow it down, and you can actually see this as a human skull which belonged to the character Bildo Quirv. There's actually a big backstory that's been written for them, because it wouldn't be Star Wars if they didn't have an expansive backstory, and they carry the moniker of having the most important skull in the galaxy. The Rancor Batista is killed, and we see my man got it that his pet's died. Now, in the expanded lore, we learn Batista actually saved his life, and the pair have bonded ever since then. The Bad Batch told us about the sacred bond that Rancors have with their owners, and this was explored in an episode when the Batch got a young Rancor named Muchi for Jabba. Originally intended to be a man in a suit, they ended up using a rod puppet after the initial effect didn't seem convincing enough. Recording Ben Burtt's dog Max, they created the creature's signature sound by getting its barks and growls and then pitching them down. Now from here they're taken to the Sarlacc pit, and in the build up to it we see some migrating banthas. They would often get caught by Tusken Raiders, who would use them as rides like we saw in the first film. And the pit itself was updated to have a beak-like head for the special editions, as Lucas felt the creature didn't feel alive enough. R2 then gets into play so he can launch Luke's lightsaber, and Boba Fett's the only character who notices he's doing this. I would have sounded the alarm, but it allows Luke to launch his plan to destroy Jabba and his cronies. As we see Jabba's soldiers moving through the barge, I love how you can catch a mural of Jabba hanging up, and it shows the guy's ego's bigger than he is. Now Boba Fett of course gets thrown into the Sarlacc pit, with him escaping in the expanded lore and his solo series. Lucas has admitted he still to this day has no idea why the character became so popular, and kinda regrets not giving him a more impactful death. When working on the 2004 DVD release, he actually planned on including an extra moment where we saw Fett escape the pit. However, in the end he decided against this, as he feared it could tease things that he'd never get to make. Luke's lightsaber is also green, but originally it was planned that it was gonna be the classic blue. If you go back and look at the posters, you can see this in the marketing, showing what the original plan for the blade was gonna be. However, a number of issues popped up when they made the movie, with the first being that the blue got lost against the skies of Tatooine. They also felt there might be confusion over how he lost it during Empire, and then it turned back up, though us nerds would have been like, look mate, it's a completely different lightsaber. So what they did is, they had a deleted scene showing him constructing it, but it kinda slowed the pacing and stopped this big reveal of it here. So Lucas just settled on it being green, and in the expanded lore, the original one was then wielded by a clone of Luke before it was retaken and given to Luke's wife Mara Jade.
As the creator of Mara Jade,
Wait! I am not the creator of Mara Jade, and I want you to get out of this office right now.
I'm sorry, Zeb.
No way.
You brought
No way.
You brought it on yourself.
I don't want you here.
I'm so
Out.
sorry, George. I didn't think it would go like this.
Out.
Dad, I got your voucher.
Out!
So he just had to come up with an excuse to use that clip, because it always cracks me up and I'm a bit of a dickhead. Anyway, there's also a moment where when Boba Fett flies across the sky and hits the barge, we can see Luke kicking someone in the foreground. The kick is miles off from hitting the guy, and Mark Hamill has jokingly said that Luke actually force kicked him. And the creative team looked at a lot of swashbuckling pirate movies in order to craft this scene, and there's definitely that feeling with ropes and boats being a big thing here. Luke is also made to walk the plank, but like a lot of those pirate films, he flips it on his head. Luke is also shot in the hand as well, and this mark later returns at the end of The Force Awakens when he takes the lightsaber off Rey. Now, Billy D. Williams didn't come out unscathed either, and apparently during the scene in which Han shoots at the tentacles, the pyrotechnic went off close to his leg and it ended up burning him. His son Corey D also makes an appearance in the scene as well, with him actually playing one of Jabba's henchmen. C-3PO is also attacked by Salacious Crumb, and this led to Anthony Daniels having a real-life panic attack.
I got claustrophobia once, and I didn't even have the whole suit on. I was lying on the floor, the camera is about that far away from me. Salacious Crumb, the wonderful Salacious Crumb, animated by Tim Rose. And he's pulling out my eye.
4A, take 2. A and B. Action.
And something went in my mind, I didn't catch a breath or something, and I suddenly could feel panic just absorbing into my body.
Lost my eye. Sergeant, help!
And I was saying, get me out, get me out, get me out, get me out, get me out. And I just kept repeating it until they managed to whiz the head off.
Now, as a nod to longtime friend Francis Ford Coppola, Lucas had Leia choke Jabba out with her chains, which was supposed to resemble Luca Brasi's death in his movie The Godfather. Lucas was actually originally in talks to direct Apocalypse Now, but he ended up exiting it so that Coppola could take over. Now, Francis actually left a little nod to him in the movie, as the character Harrison Ford plays is called Colonel G. Lucas. The final battle involving the Ewoks also builds off the back of Lucas's original idea for the movie, with the jungle setting riffing off the back of Vietnam. Come the end of the battle, they use all manner of guerrilla tactics at their disposal, with Lucas modelling these after the Viet Cong. Anyway, they get out of there before it blows up, and don't forget the droids, which gives us a brilliant victory to start the movie off with. Han says, "I owe you one now," but like, he owed you too, so are we not deducting that, mate? Like, what's this maths? Anyway, in his X-Wing we see Luke examine his hand, which he covers up by putting a black glove over it. This shot's referenced later on when Luke sees Vader's missing one, echoing the fact that he could end up going down that path. Now at this point we cut to the Death Star, and amongst the fleet of TIEs we can also catch TIE Interceptors for the first time in the saga. The Emperor arrives, who's also played for the first time by Ian McDiarmid. Now, this blew my mind when I was doing my research, but he was actually only 39 when he played this part. Yeah, he's just 7 years older than Mark Hamill is, but I've got to say, the man can play old. Now, according to him, he was just brought in to do a physical performance, similar to what David Prowse did with Darth Vader. This was then going to be redubbed with Clive Revill, who originally played the character in The Empire Strikes Back. However, McDiarmid completely knocked it out the park when delivering his lines, and thus they decided to stick with his performance, which has become iconic. Now, a lot of these moments where we get the wider shots were actually made using matte paintings.
So what are we looking at here?
Here is just a wonderful example of all these stormtroopers, and nobody knows that it's a matte painting. You just assume that this is a very large set. So there are some real stormtroopers on the set, and then the rest were added by the matte artist.
Vader also kneels before him, which is a similar thing to what he did during the hologram scene in Empire, showing who's really in charge. Now Luke returns to Dagobah, where he comes face to face with Yoda. I rate that the guy was just like sick of answering questions, and he'd rather turn over than die than dealing with more Skywalker bullshit. However, he does spell it out that Luke needs to confront Vader to complete his training, and this word confront carries a lot with it. Rather than killing him, he just wants to face his dad because he could be the person that ends up bringing him back. Now, knowing what we know by the prequels, I actually think it makes Vader's arc better in retrospect. In the end, his love for his son is what ends up saving him, and he turns back in order to save him from the Emperor. The scene of him electrocuting Luke also gets replayed in Revenge of the Sith, with him standing there and allowing Palps to take out Mace Windu. Here he refuses to stand by and allow it to happen again, and I actually think the prequels improve all this, even though it works well on its own. He also mentions how once Yoda dies that he'll be the last Jedi, which, careful mate, we don't talk about that here. Now Yoda's last words here also build off the back of his last words in the prior film.
That boy is our last hope.
No, there is another.
There is another Skywalker.
He adds in the word Skywalker, which is then clarified outside by Obi-Wan. He explains that Leia is his twin sister, and also how Anakin's death was caused by Vader because he killed all that he stood for. Alec Guinness only ended up shooting for 1 day for this movie, and we talked last time how he did this with Empire as well. Lucas made a deal with him, where he got 0.25 of the gross of these films, and in the end that netted him $100 million. That adjusted for inflation's roughly $400 million, meaning that he shot the stuff for A New Hope, and then basically did a couple of days on top of that and got $400 million. Now this is the only time where Luke calls him Obi-Wan instead of Ben Kenobi. Ben was the name he knew him as, but this is showing that he's now detached from him due to the lies about his father. Now we cut to Home 1 where we meet Mon Mothma alongside Mon Calamari legend Admiral Akbar. This ship ended up returning in Ahsoka, with Mothma also returning in the same room as the hologram. This table has been used several times throughout the expanded lore to plot out and plan attacks, and it is nice going back to the scene and seeing where it all began. Now Dermot Cradley, who plays General Madine, he apparently showed up to the set with a shaved face due to the script not specifying that he had to have a beard. However, the Kennetai based on him, that had been given one, and thus they quickly grabbed a fake one to match his action figure. Setting out, we get Han saying he feels he's never going to see the Falcon again, and originally there were plans that they were going to destroy it. This would kill off Lando, and also pay off on Han's bad feeling. Though Lando promised, not a scratch, it got out with just losing its satellite dish, which they somewhat touched upon in Solo. During that, when it was under Lando's ownership, it had a flat dish on top, so he didn't really compensate for that when flying through the trench. Now, the third act was also going to take place on the Imperial home planet called Had Abdun, with this later being renamed to, well, you guessed it, Coruscant. This was Lucas taking inspiration from Dune, with the Harkonnen home planet appearing in that. Now, instead, we cut to the Emperor's throne room on the Death Star 2, and Vader asks,
What of the reports of the rebel fleet massing near Sullust?
Now, Sullust was actually named after a Roman senator, and in the expanded lore, Nien Nunb was from the planet, and he stole the shuttle that the rebels ride in, tying these lines to that. In case you don't know, Nien Nunb's Lando's co-pilot, with him speaking Kikuyu, a language that actually pulls directly from Kenya. We also see the Emperor's advisors, who would go on to form the Imperial Council in the wake of his death. Now, Endor actually comes from the Bible, with it being a village found in Israel. King Saul went there before his final battle with the Philistines, and he came across someone known as the Witch of Endor. As the group leave the shuttle, we can catch a bearded commando who later pops up disguised as a scout trooper when they get caught. Retroactively, it's been said that this is Captain Rex, the legendary clone trooper from the Clone Wars in Rebels. We then get the speeder bike chase, and in this layer's middle switch is pulled back, and this is what's used to jam their communications. Now, according to IMDb trivia, the point of view shots here are achieved pretty easily, with a cameraman walking through the forest holding a Steadicam that shot 1 frame per second. Playing this back at 24 frames per second, it sped the footage up, and it made it appear at normal speed, giving this the feeling of whizzing through the forest. Now, the sound of the speeders themselves were actually created by using stock sound effects to thunder, which were then spliced together with a P-38 airplane. Now, after Leia comes off, she meets none other than Wicket the Ewok. Played by Warwick Davis, this guy's became a mainstay in Star Wars, with him being in almost all the movies that followed this, both in and out of costume. Warwick went on to play Willow, and if you haven't seen Life's Too Short with him, then I'd definitely recommend that you check that out.
That's Warwick, he's just going there.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, we actually were together on Star Wars: The Phantom Menace.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we had a scene together. It was cut, though. Do you remember?
Okay.
Kenny Baker, aka R2-D2, was originally meant to play Wicket, but Destiny stepped in and gave him the shits.
Joining the cast was Warwick Davis, who was just a youngster at the time, but also a die-hard Star Wars fan.
I was an 11-year-old boy at school, and my grandmother happened to hear a radio commercial on the London radio station, and they were putting out a call for short people to be in this new Star Wars movie. I don't think anybody on the movie was quite as excited as I was. You know, being an 11-year-old on a Star Wars set, there was no stopping me.
In the role of Wicket, Davis became the film's most prominently featured Ewok. But only after Kenny Baker was suddenly taken ill.
I had this scene with Carrie and the speeder bikes in California, in the Redwoods. And I was looking forward to this. I thought, well, not Carrie's nice. I like working with Carrie.
Come the morning of the shoot, Kenny was very ill in bed with what I believe was food poisoning.
I was seriously in pain. And said, well, we've got to do it because we've got Carrie Fisher in and we've got the scene set up. So Warwick took over.
72A, take 2. A and B camera, don't forget.
I had a dog at the time, and I remember whenever he would hear a strange noise, he would tilt his head from side to side to look inquisitive, and I took those kind of movements and used them in the character. So whenever he sees something or hears a strange sound, he would, tilt his head.
Kinda wild knowing how much Warwick would go on to work with Lucasfilm, and Wicket's of course one of the most memorable new characters in the film. Now, the name Ewok's based on the Native American tribe Miwok, and although they get a lot of shit, they actually carry an important message thematically throughout the entire film.
And I think they're in there to really show that you don't need technology, you need the will and the belief to take you through anything. And the fact that, the Ewoks were able to defeat the Empire only using ropes and rocks, I think that said something about them as a race of creatures.
Fighters coming in.
Doesn't matter how much machinery you have. If the will of the people is strong, they will always win.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
And action.
If you love CGI blinks added in, you'll love them too, and to be honest, I've never really had a problem with these cute little fuzzballs. Now from here we cut to Vader meeting with the Emperor and can catch his Red Praetorian Guards. Now the name comes from ancient Rome, and these tended to be skilled warriors who were too tasked with guarding emperors as well. Also, little tidbit, when designing the throne and window behind it, Lucas said that he wanted it to appear web-like. At the center of it is the Emperor, who would resemble a spider waiting for a prey to get caught in its net. Webs are traps that spiders build for their prey, and the entire Emperor's plan is devised as a trap.
It's a trap!
This is seen with Luke, the space battle, and Endor, all being designed to catch these key factions. The Death Star is actually fully operational, and thus the entire scheme's devised to get everyone in one place. Now that line,
"It's a trap!"
was originally "it's a trick," but this was changed after it got poor reactions in test screenings. Vader then manages to sense his son, whereas the Emperor doesn't.
Strange that I have not.
This shows that he's blinded to the connection Vader has with his kid, and this ultimately is how the pair beat him in the end. At this point, they get caught in the net with a dead animal luring out Chewbacca. This actually has the back end of a white-tailed deer with fake teeth stuck into its butt, which is a nice little bit of trivia for you guys watching at home. Now, believing 3PO is a god, we actually have a translation for what one of the Ewoks says. Said in Ewokese, this actually translates to "that guy's wise." Could you tell? Now, they're taken to the Ewok camp to get eaten, but Luke uses the Force to show his magic so that these little murderous bears don't make a Bob a Chewbacca. Han also says,
"I have a really bad feeling about this,"
which is a line that's been said in every movie so far.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Also like the video and subscribe, yeah?
Hurry up, will ya? I haven't got all day.
Now Luke reveals to Leia that he's her brother, and she recounts stories of her mother. We know in retrospect that, like, I don't know how you remember this, but there were actually early things in the script that would be worked in to become Padme. In the first draft, she talked about how her mother disguised as a handmaid, which she of course adopted during Phantom Menace. Now Luke surrenders and appeals to Anakin rather than Vader because he knows that's the way that he has to get through to him. Rather than going in to confront him like how he did last time, he instead hands over his weapon and gives up willingly. This is a lesson that Luke learned from the Kavan Empire, and in that Yoda told him,
"Only what you take with you."
Had Luke gone in unarmed, then he would have been okay, but he took his weapons and went looking for a fight. This is what happened with the duel at the end, because he went looking for a duel in both instances, and that's exactly what he found. This time he's going in to appeal to his dad directly, which is why instead of fighting, they first talk it out. Allowing Anakin to hold the Jedi lightsaber once more, this may make him remember exactly what it was like. I always felt there was a deeper meaning to how he held it and studied it, and this likely brought back memories of his time with the Order. However, he turns his back and delivers what's easily the most personal and vulnerable moment that we've seen with Vader so far.
It is too late for me, son.
I feel like him saying it's too late for him is him also thinking about how it's not too late for Luke, and the pair calling each other father and son now connects them on a more personal level. Luke has actually based this around the conflicts of Zeus and his father Kronos, which pull directly from the myths of ancient Greece. Vader also refers to the Emperor as master a lot, and he's very much a slave, almost begging to be freed. I always feel like Lucas had it planned out exactly what his origin story was, but even if he didn't, we do see through his life how he started off as a slave and then ended up being brought into a life of servitude before he was once more made a slave again. Luke is the only one who can truly free him, and it laces this moment with a lot of extra subtext. Now we end with him looking out over the forest again, and it shows a side to him that we've never really seen before. Across Endor, we see an Ewok stealing a bike, and we watch Han getting handy to get his way in. Now if you look outside as they enter, you can actually see a rebel dressed as a scout trooper putting a helmet on. Come when the rebels get caught later on, we see Margai Rex standing in a scout uniform, showing that some of the good guys were disguised as them during the fight. Now inside we see Han throwing something at a guard, and at this moment we get what sounds like a Wilhelm scream.
Free!
Now this is something that's appeared throughout the Star Wars saga, with it being used in almost every film. The guy making the sound here is actually sound designer Ben Burt, who popularized the scream whilst also coining the name for it. He's used it in a number of different movies that he worked on, and this is him doing his best impression of what it sounds like. Now we cut to the battle out in space and see both A-Wings and B-Wings added to the fleet. A-Wings originally had blue paint on them instead of red, but this got lost against the blue screen and thus they had to change it. However, when they showed up in the first episode of Ahsoka, they were back to being blue because they were no longer relying on models and blue screens. Realizing the shield is still fully operational, the Rebel fleet pull away from their run and head right into the Star Destroyer fleet. Back with the group on Endor, they're saved by Ewoks, and then the fight, it just kicks off. We then hear Chewbacca's Tarzan yell, and can also catch a cameo by director Richard Marquand as one of the AT-ST drivers. The other is co-producer Richard Watts, and the roof of the AT-STs actually have a design based on German Tiger tanks from World War II. They have big blast marks on the nose of the Chewbacca one, and this at least gives the audience the heads up of who we should be following. After Leia's shot in the shoulder, we also get a brief moment where Han has to move his hand because he goes to grab it but realizes it's on fire. Now back with the Emperor, he finally taunts Luke enough to get him to strike, which is immediately blocked by Vader. Looking back, I just viewed this as him reacting quickly, but I actually think there's a deeper meaning going on with this. As the Emperor says, if he strikes him down, his journey to the dark side will be complete, and thus if he landed this, he would become a Sith. This would be because he struck him down in anger, and it would become a path that he'd never be able to walk away from. However, Vader blocking this is him stopping his son from making that mistake, and thus he doesn't succumb to the dark side and can remain in the light. Now, during the duel, Luke kicks Vader down the stairs, which is a flip on the battle in Bespin in which he did the same thing to him. Lots of these moments in this fight echo that duel during that, but this time it's Luke who has the upper hand. Vader says,
Obi-Wan has taught you well.
And hey, look, man's got the high ground. Now back on Endor, we see his hand tricks the Imperials to going outside, and he does a little shrug that Kylo would later riff on in The Rise of Skywalker. Setting the charges, they blow the generator, allowing those in space to finally attack the Death Star. In the shadows, Luke ends up hiding out, and we see darkness covering his face, showing that he could end up succumbing to the dark side if he's not careful. Symbolically, this was later used in the saga when Anakin's return brought across the same technique as well. Like his father, love is used to lure him towards the dark side, and it's only upon his sister being mentioned that he begins to go on the attack. He plays into the Emperor's trap, managing to beat his dad and cut off his hand, but in this he's starting to lose himself. Now it's very much a reversal of the ending of Empire, with him starting to realise he's becoming the man his father is. Staring at his own hand, he then tosses his weapon, which again was used when Ahsoka passed the test with Anakin. I'll try to stop bringing all this stuff up, but it's just fresh in my mind. I do like talking about how these movies influence things down the line, because yeah, you can see how it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. Now the Emperor realizes that he's lost and that Luke can't be turned, which is when he decides that he has to die. Vader says, "No!" which was added into the special editions to tie losing Padme into potentially also losing their child. During the scene in which Vader lifts Palps above his head, we can also see electricity charging his skeleton and can actually catch metallic parts in his body. Throwing him down into the Death Star reactor, he was never seen again, and no way somehow did Palpatine return. At this moment, Williams also plays the Jedi theme over the top of Vader's to highlight the characters come back to the light. Lucas would actually pull several moments from this for the finale of Phantom Menace, as Darth Maul sent down the hole, much like how Palpatine was. There's also a similar shot used for Obi-Wan cradling a dying Qui-Gon, much like how Luke cradles his father here. You also have the Jedi funeral at the end, before the celebration, and looking back, it's sort of like poetry they rhyme. And this, we can see the fire burning stronger on the right side of the helmet, which is why in later appearances, it's more melted on that side. Now this scene was actually thrown in at the last minute, with it being filmed up in the hills next to Skywalker Ranch. Vader's breathing then changes to become weakened, and we see him later unmasked for the first time. Originally, David Prowse was promised he could finally get to show his face in this moment, but Lucas went back on it due to some strained on-set relationships. Lots of leaks about the movies had come out over the years, and it was suspected that Prowse had been behind them. This is why Lucas refused to tell him the true twist during Empire, and instead the script he had said Obi-Wan killed his father. In the build-up to the Returns release, the Daily Mail also ran a story revealing that Darth Vader was going to die at the end. In it suggested that Prowse was behind it, and thus he was kind of shut out from appearing in the film. He wasn't interviewed for the DVD release of the original trilogy, and he did carry the reputation of being behind the leaks. However, it was revealed that it was actually a crew member who did this, which kinda sucks when you look back at it. Fake scripts were actually sent out once more to cast members to dissuade them from spoiling stuff, and some of the leaks contained elements that had Lando being the last hope. Now, Sebastian Shaw was brought unaware of what he was filming, and upon arriving on set, he had no idea what was happening until he spotted his old friend Ian McDiarmid. Shaw originally had eyebrows as well when he was unmasked, but these were removed to keep it more consistent with his burns. Now, the cut on his head was also explained in later duels, with his mask getting split during Obi-Wan in Rebels. Kinda pick your poison with that, but I love how the unmasking scene shows Vader in a human way that we've never really seen before. All that we've encountered is this robotic silhouette, but this shows him as a man rather than just a machine. Now, the Death Star is destroyed at this point, with both Wedge and Lando delivering the killing blows. I love how while the Super Star Destroyer gets taken down and people start celebrating, we see as Akbar just kind of mourns those that had to die, and it's such an almost like a weight off his shoulders, seeing that the fight was actually worth it. At the time, the battle on Endor was the most expansive space fight ever put to screen, and in order to fill up the background, lots of things like the ships in the distance were actually just chewed up gum. Based on Operation Chastise, this was adapted into the movie The Dam Busters, which Lucas based a lot of the aerial attacks on. In Chastise, a group of technicians developed bouncing bombs that would skim along riverbeds and eventually hit a dam in order to destroy it. These scientists were known as boffins, and this is the time that it popularized the term. Now, Lucas actually gave this a nod as well, with the spies who got the plans for the Death Star 2 being called Bothans. Now, I dug into some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, and there was apparently a day called Black Friday in which 100,000 feet of film was apparently dumped by Lucas. This was because it couldn't be read by an optical printer, and the ILM team behind it had to go back to square one for it, and a lot of them got drunk when they heard the news. Now, back on Endor, we watched the scene that might have been altered the most over the last couple of years. Originally, this had a completely different score, which was later updated into this. Lucas also added in celebrations across the galaxy, with Coruscant being one that appeared in the special editions. I always remember seeing this back in 1997 and wondering what was going on, because Coruscant actually hadn't been fully shown to us at this point in our lives. This had a statue of the Emperor being toppled over, with us also getting a shot of Tatooine. This was then updated in 2004 with the Senate and Jedi Temple buildings appearing, and us also getting Naboo dropped into there as well. Lastly, the Force Ghosts were changed, with Hayden actually completely unaware of what he was filming. He's gone on to say that he would have played it differently, but it does kind of feel like they just dropped him into the scene without him actually being a part of it. Kind of makes no sense as well, because Luke wouldn't recognise this. Look, mate, I'm not going to go into it. I think my thoughts on it will be very obvious to you. Also, I've always kind of been like, there's no way Obi-Wan and Yoda would be standing there all friendly like with Anakin. He murdered all their mates and billions of people, and they're basically standing there like, oh, you're right, mate, you're back. Oh, nice to see you again. It would be like bumping into Hitler in the afterlife and being like, oh, how's it going, mate? How's it going? You would tell the lad to fuck right off. There's no way that the Mace Windu Force Ghost doesn't see him and kick the complete shit out of him. Now, they did go back and forth on how to end the film, and in some drafts, Luke would actually take Vader's helmet after the unmasking. We'd watch him put it on, and this would give the idea that he'd in fact turned to the dark side. According to Gary Kurtz, there were also versions where he'd walk off alone like a spaghetti western hero, with him going into seclusion in the Tatooine desert. In the end, Lucas opted for a happier ending due to him feeling like merchandise sales would be boosted by closing on a positive note. Either way, that wraps up Return of the Jedi, which would go on to become the highest grossing movie of 1983. Off the back of its $32 million budget, it banked $418 million, with the additional releases taking it to $475. After its release, they dropped 2 Ewok spin-off movies called Caravan of Courage and The Battle for Endor, which, the less said about the better. Doubt we're going to be doing a classic movie breakdown for those pieces of shit. However, it's undeniable how much of a success this film series was, and this original trilogy still stands as an outstanding achievement. Lucas went against the studios to make one of the biggest film franchises of all time, and it has to be said, it captured the imagination of billions. Now that wraps up our original trilogy breakdown, and huge thank you to everyone who's checked out this series. Extra shout outs to the members who pledge money to the channel every week, and it goes such a long way to helping videos like this get made. If you want to support us, then please click the join button, and as a thank you, you'll get access to videos like this every week the second we get them edited. Now if you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out our breakdown of Starship Troopers on screen right here, right up in the corner, or maybe it's below. Now, over the next couple of weeks we have a lot that we're covering as well, and we're going to aim to drop videos on Apocalypse Now, The Thing prequel, Terminator 3 and a lot more. We've got breakdowns on Gen V, Ahsoka and potentially The Exorcist 3 to look forward to as well, so